with us?
I'm here, Chair. I'm having some video problems, but
Okay,
I can hear you and I can see everybody else.
okay. Then I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Committee Monday, May 18th, 2020 at approximately 5:01 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Counselor Romana Beta,
Here.
Counselor Sidney Lindell,
Here.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Here.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Our next item is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff? Ms. McCoy?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any changes from the committee? Is there a motion regarding the agenda?
Move to approve.
Okay,
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Sidney Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion approves. Motion passes. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Approval of the consent agenda. We are gonna withdraw item 8A from the consent agenda so we can hear that. Are there other items that need to be withdrawn? Councilor Romero Worth, did you have any other items? Councilwoman Villarreal, did you have any other items?
Yes, I had a quick question on B as in boy.
Okay. Any others? Councilor Villarreal? No? Okay. Councilor Sanchez, did you have any other items you wanted to pull?
No, just A.
Okay, and Councilor Lindell?
No, just item A.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the consent agenda with items 8A and 8B being withdrawn?
Move to approve as amended.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Who was the second?
Cassette Sanchez, I believe.
Thank you. Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Sidney Lindell, Counselor Lindell, Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, our next item is approval of the minutes, the regular Finance Committee meeting minutes of May 5th, 2020. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any changes from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve. Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Sidney Lindell, Counselor Lindell, Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, great. Then that brings us to item 7A, which is a presentation. We have a budget update, a summary of the New Mexico public finance laws as applicable, and bond overview. Ms. McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilors, today we have invited Brad Flitch, our investment and planning officer, as well as our bond counsel, Peter Franklin, and our municipal financial advisor from Hilltop Securities, George Williford, to present the items that you find in your packet today. So with that, I will turn it over to Brad to give a brief intro as the other members of our team join us.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, Chairman, councilors. First is our two attendees, George Williford and Peter Franklin. They're attendees, and I'd like to give them the ability to speak as necessary. So I don't know who needs to do that. Can we get someone to move them from attendee to presenter?
Let me see if I can do that. And so which was the first we had to do?
George Williford.
Okay, let me see if I could find him on here.
I got it, Counselor Abeyta.
Okay, thank you. If you can do that, Joe, that'd be great.
George Williford and who else?
Peter Franklin.
Okay, done.
Okay, well, thank you very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Chairman or Joe, if you can let me share my screen.
Done. Go ahead, Brad.
So tonight we're just going to really be talking about our debt. It's kind of important. June 1st, we have a debt service payment of $22.3 million that we'll be processing here in the next week. And then we have another $1.5 million for the convention center on June 15th. So this is to also give a background to the finance committee. Because debt service is a large portion of our budget. There's general obligation bond debt, there's GRT debt, there's enterprise debt. And so this is kind of giving an overview. Debt service is a fixed cost. We don't get to cut that. This comes first, and it's a big portion of our budget. It's a big portion of the general fund budget. So first, George, if you're there, I have you set up first, kind of give us this, an overview. George Williford is with Hilltop Securities. He's our municipal advisor. That's a legal relationship that we have. He's on a 4-year contract. I think he's in year 2 or 3 of a 4-year contract. So George, if you want to go through your presentation.
Let me unmute. There we go. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And as Brad indicated, we have served the city since 2005. We were First Southwest Company, and then the fact that we became part of a publicly held company took on the name Hilltop Securities about 3 years ago, but the same firm, and we've worked as financial advisor to the city through that time. The information that I prepared really was meant to go along with and supplement I know a PowerPoint that Brad has prepared, and hopefully it does complement. The first page that you have on the screen, page 1, really shows the rating scales used by the 3 major rating agencies, Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's. The city, as some of you may know from past issues when we've presented or discussed those, requests and obtains ratings, bond ratings from Fitch and Standard & Poor's. We don't with Moody's, though they were dropped back, I believe, about 2008 because we had a 2-notch split rating situation with them, and they wouldn't budge, and Fitch was brought on at that time. You can see the scale starts from the highest or best ratings of AAA and then goes downward as far as investment grade to the BBB or BAA levels. And you can see the city, in the case of Fitch, is rated AA+ for your GO debt, for your senior lien GRT debt, and they also rate the sublien GRT debt at that same level because of the high coverage that you have. Standard & Poor's rates the senior lien GRT at AA+, but they have the GO rating and the subordinate lien GRT rating at AA, a notch below. And the reason they don't see the sublien and senior lien quite the same as Fitch is they have kind of a typical or traditional step down 1-notch separation because of that subordinate pledge. We might go to page 2. This presents some of the criteria or factors that Standard & Poor's in particular uses in achieving or determining ratings. And you'll see the two primary items are economy at 30%, and also the financial position of the city at 30% as well. And then management is 20%. Given the situation we're in right now with the COVID-19, the rating agencies are reaching out to a lot of issuers, cities in particular, with respect to what has been the impact budgetary and what is expected from the coronavirus or COVID-19. The fact that you've had a vibrant economy up to this point, I was going back over the rating reports today, and they cite that the presence of the state government, the high level of tourism, and so on. But they realize that at least the tourism industry has been impacted. Financial measures, that was also cited in their last and most recent reports. The fact that you built and maintained good reserve positions. And if you go back to 2008 and other times where there have been situations where the revenues were known or anticipated to drop, the city's been very proactive in making budget adjustments on the expense or expenditure side. So at any rate, that top box is for GO and GRT ratings. The other was for enterprise fund criteria. I won't go into that. Number 3, slide 3, this really talks about with respect to issuing municipal debt, the methods of sale, and the most common and really typically the most efficient is to go to the public market and sell to bond investors. Primarily it would be institutional investors, large bond funds, insurance companies, and so on. And with the ratings we just mentioned at a name like City of Santa Fe, you get good attention and good reception. And there's 2 types of public sale: competitive, where you actually invite firms to bid or syndicates to bid on sale of a bond, and then negotiated, where you pre-select an underwriting syndicate, and then it's their job to go out and market those bonds to investors. And there's pros and cons depending on the situation associated with both. Another method would be private placement. Primarily that would be commercial banks. Given a lot of factors and things that banks have faced, that's become kind of a limited source. So I wouldn't count on that as necessarily being a go-to or a readily available source. And then I put specifically, and Brad had put it down in some of his, the NMFA or New Mexico Finance Authority. Their major program is the PPRF, or Public Property Revolving Fund, Public Project Revolving Fund. And that's where the municipal GRT supports, and they've used that from their outset. They also have some other small programs that they administer, as mentioned here, water, drinking water, and then some specialty type. So in some cases, they can offer subsidized interest rates based on if their funding source, such as drinking water, SRF, has any federal funding component associated with it. They do pass through rates that are close to the rates they're able to achieve on sale of their bonds in the market. And that helps with respect to, for instance, the college acquisition was financed through NMFA. Years ago, the original convention center financing was through NMFA because it was primarily secured by lodger's tax and so on. So it was beneficial. Most cases, the GRT issues can fare as well, maybe even better in the bond market. We might go to slide 4. I tried to put together some information. I'll quickly go through this. This is the pledged gross receipts tax revenues, and it's applicable to both the senior and subordinate lien. And what it's comprised of is the 0.5% municipal gross receipts tax, the 1/16 infrastructure tax, and then the state shared. And you can see that it's been growing over most of that period of time. And there is a little bit, and it was explained in the last disclosure and official statement, anomaly of why it declined from 18 to 19. And that was primarily based on having to change and correct some receipts. And Brad can explain that. It's a timing issue. But as it stands, roughly $60 million of pledged revenues to secure the GRT debt. We might go to slide 5. This shows the annual debt service that's associated with the senior lien, the subordinate lien, and then a combination. And they have to be viewed in some respects together, because some of the tests or conditions that have to be met with respect to ability to issue additional debt ties to the combined debt service of both lien positions. And Brad, I know, has information about those ABT or additional bonds tests. But on the senior lien, that's 12.29 million as it stands now, the debt service for this year. The most constraining test is that 0.5% municipal gross receipts tax. And the test says that debt service at the senior lien level cannot exceed 1 times that 0.5%. So, it was roughly 16 million. It shows that there's 4 million room there under the test. But what this aggregate shows is at the senior lien level, when you take the 60 million total pledged revenues into account, that's like virtually 5 times the annual debt service of senior lien debt as far as coverage. And combined senior and sub, it's nearly 3 times coverage. And those are both very high, very good coverage levels, as the rating agencies have pointed out. The last slide that I had sent, this ties back to some planning. And in fact, reading the rating reports today, Fitch cited that the city had kind of ongoing plans of senior lien issuance in the amount of roughly 20 million a year. And again, Brad has information, I know, in his presentation. The senior lien financing has been used primarily to support and provide for the capital improvement program. And in most cases, it's been a biennial or every other year situation. And this models the blue line or lines are the existing debt service that you just saw. And then the orange, gray, and yellow in succession is the debt service associated for each of those if they're issued on a biennial basis. And you can see there's a rapid drop off of existing debt service, and even bringing that 20 million a year and maintaining that issuance policy and plan. There's a lot of capacity to support that type program on an ongoing basis. But with that, I'd be glad to answer questions, or once Brad's gone through his answer as well.
Yeah, I just want to make a point of clarification that the plan at that time was to issue 20 million every 2 years.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So now we have Peter Franklin. Peter's our bond counsel. So he writes all of our ordinances. He writes the resolution. He puts together, his firm puts together the official statement, represents the city in negotiations with both the Underwriters Council and signs off on the tax certificate. And also our go-to expert on anything legal when it comes to bonds. So Peter, take it away. Or not.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Very good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Franklin. I'm with Modrell Sperling. We've represented the city as its bond counsel for many years. And Brad mentioned both general obligation debt, GRT debt, and enterprise fund debt. And I'm going to talk first very briefly about general obligation debt. General obligation bonds, or GO bonds, are bonds that are payable from ad valorem property taxes. And that they have to be approved by a vote of the qualified electors in the city who are actually voting on individual bond questions like street bonds or park bonds or what have you. And those questions have to pass by a majority of the folks voting on each question in order to go forward. If a bond question fails, it cannot be brought back to the voters within the next 12 months. So if we can go to the second slide, I believe, or it's probably the third slide. So when we say general obligation bonds are payable from property taxes, we include the clause unlimited as to rate or amount, which means that if the assessed valuation within the city is not sufficient to pay the debt service on the general obligation bonds, the city is legally obligated to increase the tax rate. That almost never happens, or in the very rare instance that it could happen, it's usually when you have a very small municipality with essentially one or two very large taxpayers who end up going out of business. Not to cast aspersions, but for example, the town of Red River had a mine which at a certain point went out of business, and if Red River had general obligation bonds outstanding at that point, it probably would have been necessary to increase the tax rate a great deal to pay those bonds on the remaining taxable property within the town or the village. As I say, that is almost never a concern when they're, as with the city of Santa Fe, when the city has a diverse tax base and no single taxpayer is paying more than just a tiny percentage of the overall property tax base. So if we could go to the next slide, I think this is page 4. There are certain arrangements which the New Mexico Supreme Court has said, even though they're not, even though no general obligation bonds have been issued, the transaction is arranged in such a way that it actually has to meet the requirements of general obligation bonds, namely that the voters would have had to approve the financial transaction involved. And probably the best known case for this is a case called Montano versus Gabaldon. It involved Valencia County entering into a lease purchase agreement to purchase, basically construct and purchase detention center facilities, whereby it would make lease payments over a 20-year period, and at the end of the lease would own the jail. The New Mexico Supreme Court said, no, that's really a general obligation because the county risked losing the jail. It was building equity with each year of lease payments, owning more and more of the jail, so that if the county, even though it wasn't obligated under the lease purchase agreement to appropriate to make the lease payments in the next year, the Supreme Court said that because the county risked forfeiting its accumulating equitable interest in the detention facilities or the jail, that's really tantamount to an obligation to keep paying those lease payments out of property taxes. It's a little bit strained reasoning, but in any case, the Supreme Court put all the bond lawyers and public agency lawyers in the state on notice that they had to be very careful about how they entered into things like lease purchase agreements. Let's see, let's go to the next slide. I believe it's page 5. The other types of bonds or debt obligations in New Mexico that are not general obligation bonds are so-called special fund obligations. Special fund obligations don't require a vote of the residents of the city. And they are payable from so-called special revenues like gross receipts taxes, or the city's, the net system revenues of the city's water utility system, so-called enterprise funds. Not everything that isn't a general obligation bond, however, is actually a lawful special fund obligation. In order to be a special fund obligation, there has to be a statute which expressly authorizes the city to pledge a specific revenue stream to pay debt service on the bonds or the loan. And the thing about a special fund obligation is that if, let's say the city pledges, I'm going to use sort of worst case scenario examples here. The city isn't in any danger of this, but if the city were to pledge, say its municipal infrastructure gross receipts taxes to pay a bond or a loan, and for some reason those revenues were not sufficient to pay debt service in a given year, the bondholders or the lender, the bondholders have no recourse against the city except to continue collecting that revenue stream and to pay debt service to the extent that it can. The term of the bonds or the term of the loan payable from those infrastructure gross receipts taxes might get extended as a result of the city not being able to pay full debt service in a given year or over a period of time. But the bondholders or the lender has nowhere else to look. It cannot compel the city to raise property taxes or to impose other gross receipts taxes or to sell any of its property or what have you in order to pay that special fund obligation. That's sort of what makes it special. It's a very limited kind of legal liability. And it's really probably the most common type of debt obligation in New Mexico. Let's see here. Let's see, on page 7, as I noted, special funds may be pledged, but there has to be a specific statute authorizing the special fund to be created and authorizing the city to pledge it as security for repayment of the bonds. One thing that people are not always clear on is, although the bondholders have a security interest in the special fund, the city can actually pay the debt service on the bonds from any legally available source. So the fact that the bondholders have a security interest means they can make a claim, they have a lien against that special fund. But if the city has other money that isn't restricted, it can use that money instead of the pledged funds to pay debt service in any given year. Let's see. Brad, I think I'm inclined to stop here, Brad and Mary, I should say, unless we want to go further into other kinds of restrictions affecting multi-year contracts and obligations like the Bateman Act. That seems a little more off topic than I was thinking we needed to go.
That makes sense. Thank you, Peter.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'll open it up to questions from the committee and the other counselors that have joined us. But the takeaway so far that I'm getting, Mary and Brad, is one, and this is a question that I have along with the takeaway. So it sounds like we all heard today that there's $100 million deficit that we're projecting for this next fiscal year. And so obviously you want to cut expenses we have to cut expenses, but one expense that we can't cut is our debt service. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And I believe Brad does have a few more slides to walk us through that are very relevant to our organization and what has been pledged. I think he started out the presentation with a highlight of our current year debt payments that are due in a few short weeks. So I would like him to continue on with the presentation to give us the highlights about what this means for our own city's operating budget.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
So, Mr. Chairman, councilors, I'll skip my earlier slides because I think they've been covered. But this is our total debt service for the for any fiscal year coming forward. I'm pointing right now to fiscal year 20. This is for the entire year, and so we only paid interest in December. We paid principal and interest in June for all the bonds except for the GO bonds. We pay those August and February. And that's the difference between these. So you can see our debt service for next year is gonna be roughly $23–24 million. And yeah, it doesn't really change until you pay off another bond like we do in 22 and 2023. That means we've permanently extinguished debt as you see these debt service numbers fall. And the next chart, so the next chart only really applies to the gray and blue bars, the senior and subordinate lien. And that's because GO bonds are paid by property tax. This is our GRT pledged revenues. This includes the 33% decline we forecasted for next year in GRT revenue. That's this here decline from 20 to 21. And then we project growth out of that taking 5 years, 15% year 1, 10% year 2, 7% year 3, 10% year 4, and back to even year 5. But as you can see, this is our pledged revenue. This is how much we've pledged, and this is our actual GRT debt service. And as George was talking about, what you're looking at is the spread between the line and the top of the bar. That's the coverage.
And what does that have to, what does that have to be again? How big does that gap have to be?
For pledged revenues, there's a number of one. The test I had a second line on here, and that's it. Basically, you've got to be about 45%. Right now, so you take half of the blue line and subtract 4 million, which is certain costs that the city has exempted, and that has to be 1 times the bar. So we don't want to ever hit the bar with the second line.
Brad, I have a quick question. When you look at our budget that we adopted for FY20 debt service, we had said the total amount in debt service was 32.2 million. What's the difference between, how come it's 32 million, but then on the slide 5 showed 21.8 million? What's the difference there? Why is there?
Mr. Chairman, I'll have to look into that. We shouldn't have budgeted 32.8 million last year.
We budgeted 32.2 million.
Yeah.
Principal, we budgeted 21 million, and interest 10 million.
I will look into that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, and is there anything else? And just definitions. So that really brings us to the end of the presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions from I'll start with the committee and then ask the other counselors that have joined us. I can't see everybody now. I just have the definition still up. So if you could raise your hand, then I think I'll be able to see your hand raised, the blue hand, if you have any questions. Okay, there's, I see a hand. Let's see. Counselor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We didn't go through the full document that you all sent us through the packet material, and it goes more into special fund doctrine. And I'm wondering if we're going to go into that further as it relates to shortfalls in revenue. Anyone?
Brad, Mary.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we'd be happy to go over that. What page are you referring to?
Well, there's a lot of dense information. A lot of it has some jargon that I don't quite understand because I'm not in this field. But I guess the one that I was wanting more explanation was slide 15 or page 15. It's a special fund doctrine. It says continued, and it starts with the security interest granted. And it has other points about shortfall in revenue sufficient to pay debt service.
Mary, this is Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and
You want
go
me to
into
go
these
ahead?
details.
Okay.
I'm just wondering what else we need to know as it relates to shortfalls in revenue, and if you're trying to let us know about our options or what our limitations are. I'm not quite sure, but this particular slide, I really needed more explanation.
Councilor Villarreal, I'd be happy to try to address that. To answer your last question, I'm really not trying to give you options or limitations, at least as I was writing this. I was really just trying to describe what I thought would be relevant aspects of the special fund doctrine. But what I think you're getting at is if the city takes a revenue stream which it has pledged as security for special fund obligations, it's various gross receipts tax bonds or wastewater bonds or what have you, even if the city budgets those funds for other purposes, for operations, for example, the bondholders have a lien on those revenues. And if the city, if there's a shortfall in the payment of debt service on outstanding bonds, the bondholders would sue the city, and they would have a legally superior claim to funds which the city has budgeted for other purposes. That's a very stark way to put it, but I think that's probably what you're asking. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a piece of it. I guess you said that the special fund obligations, you can't compel the city to increase property taxes or GRT in order to pay for those, right?
That's correct.
So, but the city also has an ability to do that. If I'm just trying to understand our options. Like it says you can't compel us, but there is a possibility to pay off bond debt, that there would be a need possibly to increase property taxes or GRT. Well,
I want to make sure that we keep the different concepts in their proper categories.
Okay.
General obligation bonds have the feature that if property taxes are not sufficient to pay those bonds, the bondholders can compel the city to increase the rate of property taxes to the point where the property tax revenue is sufficient to pay. Special fund bonds don't have that feature, but what they do have is that the bondholders have, generally speaking, a priority claim on the specific revenue stream that is pledged as security. So if you have bonds that are secured by the half-cent gross receipts tax, for example, the debt service on those bonds, or rather the owners of those bonds would have a right to collect that half-cent gross receipts tax from the city ahead of any other claim, including the city budgeting it for some other purpose. They would not have the ability to say to the city, you need to impose a new gross receipts tax to pay us. They only get the revenue that the existing gross receipts tax that was pledged is actually generating, but they have a priority claim on it.
Got it. That was helpful. Thank you.
Anything else, Councilwoman
Not
Villarreal?
at the moment. Thank you.
Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of points, and I don't know who's the best to answer, so Mary, maybe you can just play gatekeeper. The level of debt that we had was appropriate for the city of our size and the revenue streams that we had prior to the pandemic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So the pandemic has put us in a position which nobody foresaw, nobody's fault. We are just trying to deal with the situation that's been essentially imposed on us.
Exactly. It's really the impact to the gross receipts tax and property tax. And it's because we unlike your house, we did not borrow money against the property, the city facilities or the convention center. We borrowed against gross receipts tax, sort of your paycheck. And so they don't care what happens to the property. They're just concerned about your paycheck. And our paycheck, gross receipts tax, properties tax, lodgers tax, have all taken a massive hit.
Right.
And that's the issue.
Right. And I think it's important to note that, so you said all this debt service can't be cut. Can somebody just quickly talk about the kinds of things that this bond money has allowed the city to do and the impact of doing those things on the economy, the jobs created? I mean, just generally, it creates jobs. It's, it's repairing roads. It's addressing our deferred maintenance, that kind of thing. Can somebody kind of put that into a?
When you look at like the 2018 gas tax bond, we leveraged a stream of revenue where we were going to spend $1 million a year for the next 10 years fixing potholes, because you can't really do a big thing with $1 million a year. But by leveraging that and bringing that money forward, we borrowed $11.5 million approximately, and we repaved Rodeo Road and a number of places, employing folks from GM Emulsion, for the last 3.5 years, and probably will for the next year too. That's just one example. When you look at the 2018 GRT bond, the amount of contractors working at Sal P Pool and rebuilding the building and the pool. Not only have we made a significant investment in facilities, but we've also employed a lot of Santa Feans in the process: electricians, plasterers, concrete workers, framers, plumbers, so designers, engineers. So I mean, it's an important aspect to the overall Santa Fe economy.
And likely in the 2008 recession and in recessions generally, isn't it true that this is the kind of government spending that helps pull us out of those recessions, gives us jobs, puts people to work, helps get things moving?
That's correct.
Okay, and then I also just want to, the overarching point here is that debt service is something that can't be cut. And I don't think we want to be messing around with revenue streams and having bondholders sue us to make sure they're paid, because that, in essence, would affect our bond rating and would affect the long-term well-being, financial well-being, and economic well-being of the city if we did that, because it would affect our bond rating. And as you said, I think in the beginning, that is, the higher our rating, we want a high rating because that lowers our interest rate or the cost of the money to do these good kinds of things. Am I saying that?
That's correct.
If you have a better way to say it, again, this, like Councilor Villarreal, this is not my field, but these are my understandings, and I think it's good because sometimes we get into this, I don't know, this really heavy jargon about financing and stuff, and we forget what it is that this money has done for us.
I think you said that very well, Counselor.
Okay. If anybody can say it better, I'm sure you guys can. So if nobody wants to take a crack at it, that's fine. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera, did you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I wanted to clarify was that I assume that any bonds that we did previously were done under the assumption of the current property taxes. So unless something happened with property in Santa Fe, we wouldn't really need to raise property taxes. Is that a correct assumption?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, that'd be correct. If there's really two things that matter, is one, the value of the property. As long as the value of property does not precipitously decline. Again, they measure it once a year. So it's not like GRT where it's every day. The value of things can change, or the volume of things can change. The important part is they assess it once a year, you pay it twice a year. It's very slow. They don't move it fast. Property values don't move fast. So in that sense, you're correct. The other aspect is collections and the county treasurer collecting it. Santa Fe is somewhere in the 97, 98% collection rate of property tax. If that was to fall to say 80%, we would see that in our receipts. So it's the ability to pay as well as the value of the property.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was my only question.
Councilwoman Vihil Coppler, did you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Councilor Garcia.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
can you
Councilwoman.
make sure that everybody's muted? Can hear people typing and background noise.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth, you have your hand up. Did you have another question? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. So somewhere I was hearing, and I've been wondering this, and I don't know, I know not just enough to be dangerous. Is there some talk maybe at the state level or the federal level about buying municipal bonds? And could that help us down the road? Is anybody familiar with that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, yes, that is correct. The Fed has actually issued a municipal facility, MLF, Municipal Liquidity Facility. This only applies to municipalities over 200, with a population of over 250,000. That's something that we did look into as soon as the Federal Reserve made the announcement at the end of April. So we do have the ability, it's a short-term opportunity for debt issuance, essentially. And we would, since we fall well under the $250,000 population floor of the Fed, we would actually have to apply through the state. So that's probably where you have heard the references to the states. So we have been in conversation with the governor's office about that opportunity. Essentially what this would do, it would give us a little bit more liquidity, a little bit more opportunity for cash flow in the very short term. I believe the limitation is 24 months, but I can get you some more information. I'll do a briefing for you on
That'd
it.
be great. So the idea is that they would buy out our bonds, which would help us because we wouldn't have to have so much money guaranteeing those bonds. And in effect would be able to, assuming we had it, redirect it. Is that the way that thinking goes?
If I might, Mary, do you mind if I interject, Mr. Chairman and Councilwoman? The Municipal Liquidity Fund, they've broadened the repayment from 24 to 36 months, but over the last, I would say 10 days, it's become very clear. They came out last week with their interest rate setting mechanism, and the Fed even today put out information stressing that this was a last resort source, and it's somewhat a punitive pricing. So essentially they're saying if you're a municipality that has no other ability to go and finance cash flow or liquidity needs otherwise, you can come to the Fed. But it's really for a city like Santa Fe, even if you were in the population level that was eligible, you'd be better served if there were short-term needs to do it through one of the private placement or some type of shorter-term note in the public market.
Okay, so this really isn't an option for us.
Not as it stands. If they bring out a program like they did in 08, 09, like the Build America bonds or something like that, there might be some alternatives that would be attractive to the city.
And if we were to take this now, if we were to go down this route, does that impact our bond rating as well?
Well, if you were in a real liquidity crunch, the rating agencies would see that as maybe being more detrimental. That's why I said they've always cited the city for having built and maintained good reserves. So the fact that you're entering this down side with a good reserve position and making budget, trying to address it budget wise, we're hoping there's not going to be any rating impact, at least going in.
Okay, so, and I guess this would also point to the other decisions we're having to make that are really hard votes budgetarily to, deal with this enormous downturn. So I think that's important to note that all of these tough decisions, are interrelated and speak to, what people are looking at in terms of whether we're doing the hard work, making the hard decisions to survive this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I guess, Mary, that concludes our presentation.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the presenters, both George and Peter and Brad as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you all.
So we're going to move on to the items that were pulled from the consent agenda. The first is item 8A, which is a request for approval of amendment number 3 to the original PSA contract number 18-0910 to Mountain River Consulting for providing database development, training, and support services to the City of Santa Fe's Utility Billing Division. Myself and Councilor Lindell heard this at the Public Works Committee. The concern that I think we both shared is the amount of the contract, $700,000, especially given the what we're about to enter as far as our budget goes. I asked at Public Works if IT could join us at this next meeting so we could ask questions regarding our Munis system, ERP, Tyler, and the need for such a contract at this time. But before we get to that, I'm gonna ask Councilwoman, or give Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez an opportunity to ask her questions, because she actually contacted me earlier today asking for this to be pulled. So that's kind of a summary of what happened at Public Works. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, your questions.
My questions are really along the same lines of, you know, it's such a high contract. We are looking at a third year of this contract and understanding if this can be taken in-house, both with the updates that have occurred with Munis and also with our current financial crisis, and looking at what opportunities we have. So I think I'd like to hear from Public Works, and I'd like to hear from IT a little bit on those lines, and then I'll see if I have additional questions at that point.
Okay, also Councilor Villarreal, you have your hand up. Let's ask your question also, and then maybe they can cover all of these concerns with their answers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I meant to let you know this was a item I also wanted to pull. I think what I had a problem with, other than not just the amount, but it's a kind of contract that leaves us wide open. And I wasn't quite clear what we were getting in terms of deliverables. And it was so open-ended, in my opinion, that it left us with no specific end date as to when this contract would be completed, which leads me to think that there's more potential for it to be wide open for future contracts of this size. I wasn't sure if it was sole source. I was wondering if there were IT staff that would be able to be utilized for this particular need. There was technical work needed, but I guess I just felt like the contract left us in a place where we would end up having to be reliant on the consultant. And I'm just curious if this really should be a contract that would be managed by IT, not the utilities department, because of the expertise needed. And also wanted to know more about the training plan, so that if we were to move forward later on, if this contract was clear, I guess more clear on like how it was going to be completed, but that we would have a plan in the future of a city employee that would be able to be trained, so that we would have that person or maybe other staff people to be able to do the internal, like the system upgrades, doing the managing of the maintenance and operations, so that we're not relying on a contractor indefinitely. And I'll stop there. I had some other concerns, but I'd like to get some more clarification on those.
Thank you, Councilwoman Villarreal. I think you pretty much raised all the same concerns that we had at Public Works. So Mr. Jones, this is in your shop, so I'll go ahead and allow you the floor first.
Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee, thank you for an opportunity to speak. I do hear what the council is saying. And from what I'm hearing, it's not necessarily about the validity of the software support and what the billing system does. I think it's the details behind that. And so I'm just going to take, if I may, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to kind of lay the foundation of where we were, where we're at, and where we're going. Our current billing system is UCIS. It is a de novo software And then it's a dated version, right? So I'm sure, as you hear many times, right, the software is 18 years out of date. Because it's out of date and it's not supported by the software, we do have to pay a premium in order to keep that machine running. And that is what Mountain River does for us. I think we've evolved over the years on how we do that. At one point, IT did provide the support for the UCIS system. But as again, that system became antiquated and they were no longer providing the updated supports, that became very cumbersome. And it was actually at one point, utilities and IT both had contracts with Mountain River to, again, to keep these things moving. And it was actually for efficiencies, maybe 3 years ago. So ultimately, the contract that IT had with Mountain River was still funded from the utilities. Not putting Joshua on the spot, but in my mind, the way it worked is I would give Joshua a couple $100,000. In turn, he would execute a contract with Mountain River, and I would also execute a contract with Mountain River. So we did bring that into utilities to streamline the work. And what I mean by work is Mountain River is our update and support of that software. If there's a system glitch, a lockdown, data reports that have to be run, utilities does that, and it is to be either after hours or in a crunch situation as the bills are trying to come out. So that being said, we did look at, there are things that we have brought internally that we try to be smarter on the system. But probably about 7 years ago, we started down the path of trying to implement a new utility billing system. We've started that process. We hit some barriers and some obstacles that we've been working through. And I assure the council that we are on the end of that work, being ready to come back before the governing body with an amendment to move forward with Advanced. What Advanced does, it allows me to put the UCIS system to rest. We would move off of that system and move into Advanced. The latest version of Advanced, which would come with update and support, meaning when the system doesn't work, I can get on the phone with customer support, and the software company helps walk through those problems and fix them. Right now with the UCIS, we don't have that ability. It is only Mountain River that does that for us. There are some amazing work that IT does for us. I think, again, just through evolution, their strengths have been more like around the networking, around our financial systems, around how we manage personnel. And UCIS and the billing system kind of moved into a bubble where Mountain River has become that for us, that support. Talking with Director Alicio, I think maybe there is some opportunity for IT to really kind of peel that back again after a few years and see if there's functionality that they could look at. I think my request would be is that we would allow them to do an evaluation and then do a transition plan, not just stop the support service and expect him and his staff to hit the ground running. That it would take, one, they need to understand what it is they're getting into, and then be able to take off the pieces that they feel they can be successful with. So then backing back up to the Advanced system, that's really where we've been putting our focus and our effort. Our training and all the work that we've been doing is preparing us to be successful in Advanced. We've worked with the IT department. We meet continuously through that process of developing the contract, the implementation plan, even the training of staff. We've partnered together to get IT staff to workshops on Advanced. And so we've really been investing in IT to be successful in Advanced. The main reason is if we spend a lot of time and money and resources in getting his staff to become experts in the system, that I am really working hard to pull the plug on in the next 12 to 14 months. I'd rather have them be experts in the system that we're using next. So I got off track a little bit, but I'll stop there.
So Shannon, with that though, can we do that during this next year and not spend or not allocate 700,000 towards this contract? Like, in other words, can we then maybe postpone this, you come back with a different plan, maybe half, 350,000, and that'll take you through the next 6 months, and within that time frame get also work with IT to start taking this over, because I agree with Councilwoman Villarreal. I think Councilwoman Sanchez has the same concern. Myself and Lindell does also. It's a lot of money, and I don't think we should put 700,000, another year's worth of work towards this. I think what you're proposing we should do sooner rather than later. And I think the way to do that is to limit the amount of money we give to this company now. So there is kind of that urgency to get this transition done.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So, and before Shannon answers that question, I think what it might be good is in 6 months, say do half, and in 6 months revisit. That way IT will have had time to see what they can and can't do, how much capacity they have. I feel like IT has already got a lot on their plate. And so if we, in 6 months, revisit and we see whether, you know, what they can and can't do, and whether we need to, you know, do another hit with this contract with Mountain River. But we come back and we look at it, because rather than say IT is going to do it, because IT may have challenges of its own, especially in this environment, and may not be in a position to take it over. So it might be something we need to continue on, but at least, you know, we're taking it in small chunks. Is the only thing I would add.
Councilwoman Lindell, could you have the numbers down as far as the 700,000 and I thought the information you added at Public Works was very good, because I mean, when you look at 700,000 and what we're getting for it, I could be wrong, but it sounded like we might be able to get it for a lot cheaper, even if we didn't go with IT and we left it with this company. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My concern really isn't the cost per hour of the consulting. It's the number of hours that we're using the consulting. We're using the consulting for 5,200 hours. It ends up being the way that it's presented to us tonight at 700,000 with that number of hours, or at that cost. It's basically hiring 2.5 employees at $280,000 at a salary of $280,000. You know, I can't support that. We've got to find a way to do that better. We've dealt with this billing system. I believe it's, you know, we've been struggling with this since 2013, and we got to find our way through this, and quickly. It's a luxury that we can no longer afford, and we can't kick the can down the road any further. But you know, and I penciled that out at I don't know, 130. I don't have it right in front of me. $135 an hour, and the contract 700,000. I just don't understand why we need that amount of consulting. It doesn't make sense to me, and we've got to find a different way to do it, because when you pencil that out to employees at 2.5 employees at $280,000 base, that doesn't work, particularly in these times. So I think that's probably the information you were looking for, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman Rendell. Councilwoman Vihil-Coppler, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
I have mostly a comment, and what I wanted to say is that I'm not sure that we want to go down the road of training IT employees to train and learn a system that is going away. As I understand it, all of this data entry and submission is intended to bring the current billing system or invoicing system or whatever it is up to date into what the city is doing now with their overall financial system. And I'll remind you of the comments I made at Public Works Utilities, and that is that we don't have a very good customer service invoicing system still. It's improved. But, let's not forget some of these IT employees are on furlough and who knows what's going to happen next fiscal year. But I can understand, and I think maybe Councilor Romero Worth's idea of coming, revisiting it in half a year or something. But I think we would lose more if we dropped doing this and transitioned it over to IT, because we're going to lose a lot of the database. Plus, we're going to lose the efficiencies of the retired employee and everything that the knowledge base, because there's something to be said for a well-trained, very familiar person doing this work. I know at Public Works Utilities, I think there was a comment made, well, this is a real cush job for a retired employee. I don't agree with that, but there's a lot of efficiencies that we have using an employee, retired employee or otherwise, that's already familiar with the system. It is working crazily and from a knowledge base that we won't get anywhere else. And I asked at the prior meeting, what's the cost benefit? And I think it's right there. There's going to be some transition learning curves and then perhaps vacancies and furlough hours missing in IT. And then why spend all that time when eventually when this is done, the old system goes away. That's how I understand it. But I agree, $700,000 is a lot of money. I understand too that the amount, it has been said that if it's not needed, it won't be spent. I think there's where the efficiencies lie, but having a testing or a review down the road to see if we're any further ahead and if we're gaining any savings by, working more efficiently and faster. I believe Carol Romero Worth's idea is a good one, but I think we have a lot to lose if we just sort of drop this and transition it over. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll put my screen on so you can see my handsome face. Shannon, I wasn't sure if, so this is to bridge the old system with the new system. Is the old J.D. Edwards system, is that still the green screen system? What we used to refer to as the green screen?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, that is true. There's actually multiple platforms, right, that the utility billing is running on. They're all bridged, but the J.D. Edwards is also included in that for the accounting.
All right, and that's a really old system. How much do we stand to lose financially if we don't assume this contract, if we turn it down? Do we have an idea of that?
I hate to think about what the worst scenario, but ultimately I do know that we bill about $6 million a month, or about $70 million a year, that the bills that go out through 4 cycles, again, probably close to 36,000 customers that receive those. Again, tremendous amount of transaction and account information, right? How many transfers occur, new buildings, all of that is pushed through that system. Our financial year end, right, reports come out of our billing system. For a utility, right, this is a heartbeat of the utility, right? It's where our revenues come in, and it's where we interact most with our customers. And so ultimately, it is to help us transition to the new utility billing software. They do play a role in that, understanding the UCIS. But even if consideration was that we wanted to take maybe intermediate steps and do evaluation along the lines, I do believe the utility's intent is, again, every Thursday when they run the billing for that cycle, it's important to know that we have all hands on deck ready. If there was an issue or a hiccup with that system, we can address it immediately, typically, right? And it's in the middle of the night into the wee hours of the morning. making sure that we don't double bill people, didn't get left off, that the amounts aren't right, that people aren't getting for $2.5 million, making sure that we get those right. And being able to start the fiscal year with a contract in place, even if it was at a lesser amount, know that we have those resources available to help staff be successful. That is, we can continue the evaluation. We meet with IT really continuously. I mean, they're very ingrained in our organization, and again, very capable people. Really, just the focus has been using, where we use the strengths. For East Mountain River, strength was UCIS. We're leveraging that. It will continue to get more expensive as that system gets older and older, and which is why we've really put in effort into updating that system and getting something more robust in place with more functionality.
Right. All right. Thank you for that. I would hate for us to lose $1 million to save 700,000. So, and I know you can't tell me that may or may not happen. The other question I had is whether the contract allows for something to be done halfway. So can we do a contract until December and then relook at this, or is the original contract specific?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rivera, the language in there would be, again, that the contract is only contingent upon the budget. So again, we're putting a contract in place with the budget. We haven't even put before you yet.
But wait a minute, Shannon, if we authorize 700,000 tonight and that council, the argument's going to be you approved it back in May when you approved it at council. So for you to say that the budget isn't even in place yet, that's a slippery slope, and that's why we're being so diligent as a finance committee now and asking these questions.
Yes, no, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And that's exactly why we put the language in the contract, that the contract is contingent upon the budget, because it does take us a couple months to get the contract in place before the budget's even approved. And so also the contract would have termination clause. If we decided not to use Mountain River, right, written notice within 30 days, we could cease that. We still control the task orders that go through. Again, the diligence that's there by staff. But again, I think for utility staff, the intent is that if there was an incremental step, I think the most critical thing was having a sufficient amount of funding and a contract in place at the beginning of the fiscal year. So we make that transition seamlessly, so that each Thursday, again, we're processing the bills and we're wanting that to work fine. And when it doesn't, that we're able to respond immediately and correct any glitches that may occur.
Thanks, Shannon. So there's other language in the contract that either allows us to opt out or continue this contract if we so choose.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'm going to give Mr. Elicio a chance to chime in before I go back to a second round of questions. I have Councillor Cassette Sanchez's hand up, Councillor Villarreal, and Councillor Vigil Koppler. So, but before that, can we hear from our IT director? What are your thoughts on all of this, Joshua?
Yeah, first of all, I truly, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee, I truly appreciate the conversation that is ongoing at this point in time, because this really is a microcosm of what we're seeing overall within the city itself. Within IT, we're very, very conscious with regard to the fiscal current crisis that we're under at this point in time. And so we have taken initiatives within the IT department to ensure that we are maximizing efficiencies with the tools that we have, with the resources that we have, and essentially having to go through and redo our whole fiscal year 21 strategy, which essentially has been turned upside down. So my discussions with Director Jones has been centered around a couple areas. Number one is, where can we be most cost effective? And number two, how can we in IT be able to augment and mitigate some of the cost here? So from my perspective, and again, I appreciate especially Councilor Romero-Worth's comments with regard to what is on IT's plate today. We have a tremendous amount. And so we're at a point right now where we're looking at all of FY21 strategy. Where do we need to focus? What do we need to do? But with regard to this particular contract here, and just to highlight some points from what Director Jones gave, and again, it was laid out fairly well there, is that today ITT is not dedicated to the UCIS application. So we are called in just in case of an emergency that does happen. Currently, Mountain River is dedicated 100% to this product. As Director Jones had laid out, there is a lot of money at stake here. Number two, the utility application is very highly complex, and it does take time day in and day out to be able to administer things effectively. If you think about when UCIS came into play here within the city of Santa Fe, we're talking almost 20 years of highly customizing an application to be able to efficiently run on an antiquated system itself. So there is a lot of technical aspects that go into managing and maintaining the UCIS application. And as I said, we're in a shifting priority at this point in time. If you could imagine, the IT staff was fully dedicated for a good month and a half to establish a e-government foundation here within the city. If I may add, if this would have happened 2 years ago, we would have never been able to do what we do today. And so over the last couple of years, the IT department has been focused in two major areas. Number one is the infrastructure, and number two, ERP. And so right now where IT is looking at is how can we address the e-government priorities going forward. So this is where UCIS does come in. Number one, it's an antiquated system. So we need to ensure that there is a mitigation of costs. So how can IT augment some of the day-to-day stuff or some of the operation and maintenance? Again, some of the discussions that myself and Director Jones have had was how can we achieve that? There are some very, very good recommendations by the counselors, putting that forth. Number two on that one there is that we're moving in a direction to incorporate a new modernized application. Again, Director Jones had talked about an advanced utilities system. We need to make sure that we get off of the current UCIS system as fast as we can and as safely as we can. The reason being is that this particular application sits on an AS400 system today that is going to be sunsetting next fiscal year. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the full support from IBM is not going to be there. We're going to have to continue to rely on a third-party contractor, if you will, who's been helping us today to be able to manage and maintain this AS400. So it is absolutely essential and critical that we move towards a new modernized application and the advanced utility billing system. And third, what we need to do is ensure that this new advanced billing system that we're bringing in is going to integrate into our current ERP fiscal application. So ultimately, what we want to do is get away from the manual processes that are ongoing today, whether that's supporting the UCIS system from an IT perspective, and of course, the day-to-day care and feed that system has. And again, ultimately being able to manually feed, or what we're doing today, manually feed into the current ERP application. So I think from a bottom line perspective, we within IT would definitely have to address, number one, our priorities from a city perspective. Number two, be able to work with utilities, which we have been, to be able to determine how do we mitigate cost. Number three, to ensure that we have a good plan of action going forward with a new modernized application, and then ultimately interfacing into our ERP system. So I also want to address, well, can we hire 1 or 2 or 2.5 people within IT to manage this? And the answer is no, because this particular system requires specific knowledge, specific technical knowledge to be able to run it day to day. And that's something that just doesn't grow on trees. And so it would definitely take us time within IT to be able to, number one, come up to speed, to be able to see how we could help Director Jones and his public utility department to be able to do the O&M of the UCIS application, and at the same time transition into a new modernized area. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be done. I think it can, but it's definitely going to take us time because UCIS is just one platform that we have to continue to be there for if an emergency does occur. So I apologize for being long-winded, but I definitely wanted to give a bigger picture or add to what Director Jones had said with regarding to this particular application. But it is very, very imperative that that as ITT shifts to e-government, that we do it in a very prudent fashion, a very prioritized fashion. And UCIS, or I should say the new Advanced Utility Billing System, is going to be key in our strategy going forward.
Councilwoman Casa Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Joshua. That actually did answer a number of the questions that I had. I appreciate getting the perspective from IT. This would be an extension. We'd be going into the third year of this contract, correct, Shannon? Yep. And then have we been reaching the max with this contract in other years? In other words, are we spending $700,000 a year on this contractor?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Casset Sanchez, I'm trying to recall, but I actually think the annual spending is probably closer to around 300,000. Because this is the third year, it accumulates and what the contract amount is authorized for. Our procurement only allows us to have a 4-year contract under the procurement before it has to, some of the procurement has to come in. And I think a majority of the, not a majority, a big chunk of the expenditures currently really had to do with how we re-interfaced UCIS into the new Tyler Munis system. I believe there was a significant amount of work that was also done there and creating those business, the workflow process and interfacing those systems.
Okay, so we hit about $300,000 knowing that there was this extra chunk as we integrated into Munis. So would we expect it to be, to the hours that we would bill to this contractor to be well below the levels that we are authorizing for at this point?
Right, and again, I apologize for not having those numbers right before me, but it is my belief, my personal belief, that it would not be the full $700,000 in the fiscal year.
Chair?
Councilwoman Lindell, yes, on that point.
Yeah, on that point, at Public Utilities, we were told that, I forget the number they were at this point in time with the contract, that this year's contract, but that by the end of this fiscal year, they do expect that they will expend the entire 700,000.
Yeah, I remember that. Okay, go ahead, Councilwoman Casa Sanchez, continue. Thank you.
Okay, and that was with the extra, was that with the Munis integration piece, Shannon?
Yes, I would believe so. And again, I'm happy to pull those numbers again. I apologize for not having them, but I can get the expended to date.
Okay, I think that was it. Joshua, thank you for answering a lot of my questions. You know, really, it was a lot of how specific is this knowledge? Can we integrate it? I would much rather be able to pay city employees than pay a contractor, especially with everything going on. It is good to know that this is very specific information. I also would really like to look at what this, you know, as Councilor Villarreal mentioned, what this exit strategy looks like. How can we really be decreasing our spending? You know, to Councilor Rivera's point, we want to make sure that we are not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. But I would like to explore potentially if we can look at Councilor Romero-Worth's proposal. Do we look at a half amount, see how we might be able to integrate this internally and see what other work that we can be doing to really be ensuring that we're taking care of the city, taking care of those taxpayer dollars. So thank you.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were still questions that weren't answered that I had asked earlier. But as we got more information from the IT director, I was still unclear about the plan to get the system integrated into the ERP. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's really the second objective, what we're trying to do come this fiscal year, FY21. So just to review, number one, taking a look at what kind of O&M is involved with regard, and O&M being operation and maintenance, being involved with the current UCIS maintenance, if you will, of the application itself. Number two, to have a clear direction as to how we are going to transition into the advanced utility billing system. As Director Jones has stated, we've been working with him, with his group over the last 6 months to develop an architecture, to develop a strategic way of how we are going to address the transition between the current UCIS system and the advanced utility billing system, which again, and I apologize, for saying this, but I do view this as a mini ERP because there is a lot of transition and a lot of upgrade to this antiquated system of UCIS into advanced utility billing. Once we have the advanced utility billing system set, then it's just a matter of creating a application interface, if you will, into the Tyler Munis system. And at which point we should be able to move away from the tremendous manual process that we're undertaking today and go to a more automated process between the two systems itself. So that's the plan that we have right now. And again, we do have a resource that has been working with the public utility company or the water division in the advanced utility billing. As I said, we already have a architecture already built out. We know where the application is going to reside. We know what, how we are going to, what the overall, again, framework is going to look like to help get us there. But I do have to emphasize that Mountain River is going to be a vital piece to this because, again, number one, they're very, very intimate into the current UCI system that we have, very knowledgeable, and we have to utilize them to transition all of that data into the new system itself. So there are a number of steps that we have to take to be able to get us to that point. And again, we had a lot of lessons learned from ERP. I've already been bringing in the ERP program manager into this project itself. So he is well aware of how we are going to construct this framework. And so, as I had stated earlier, IT is shifting a lot of their strategy towards e-government. That's where we have to go. That is very, very vital for us. And of course, the second piece to that is ensuring that that we are getting off a platform that is no longer going to be supported in any way, shape, or form come FY22. So it's important for us to get to that point. So hopefully I answered your question there, Counselor.
Yes, and I see the expertise you're referring to. I also think that ITT has a certain expertise that can be drawn in so that when we're looking at this particular system, that we have you all to look at the maintenance and operations of the system. I think that's important because again, then this would go on forever with a contract I don't think we need to extend. And I don't like when you say mini ERP, that freaks me out. That's like a whole nother module that we don't even want to think about. And I wouldn't even use that term because ERP is already like a very complex system, and to do like another piece of it, like a mini piece of it, doesn't sound appealing to me. I guess when I keep looking at the contract, I don't feel like it sets parameters or defines the parameters of the deliverables. And so it's still this open-ended contract. So I feel like if we're going to go back and look at a lesser amount, I do think that the contract needs to be very clear about deliverables and what we're going to be moving forward with, and what we can be, how we're going to be part of the interface, our staff. So I guess I don't think that all these pieces are placed in the contract completely. And that's what worries me. If we're going to be moving forward with some version of this later on, because I think it needs to be sent back to give us another, I don't know if it's we need to rescope it and then come back, but I do think it needs to be a lot more clear in the contract about what we're going to be, what we're asking for and what the parameters are for this contract. Thank you.
Councilwoman Vihil Coppler, did you want to add something before I call for a motion from the committee members?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I think it's important to complete this utility billing system. And of course, you know, it's going to make, I think it's going to make us be more accurate. And before Mr. Alicio commented, I was going to say that, yes, this system, we're still on the AS400, which is a dinosaur. And I think we need to become more compatible with the modernization we're doing with ERP. And, you know, I'm going to take you back to a few years ago, not too long ago, because I wasn't on council yet, but you might recall, and I was a victim of it, many people were, and they were complaining, back to a time when we were getting like 3 billing cycles in invoice. I got a utility bill and I didn't know where it was coming from, and the water division couldn't explain to me where those numbers came from. And the other thing that was going on there was that, oh, we're months behind, but we can't tell you what those months are. And I see Mr. Alicio agreeing, I think he is. Those were horrible times. They've gotten better, and maybe y'all have forgotten it, but the reason they've gotten better is because we've had the contract with Mountain River, and they've been working on this, and our utility bills, the customers are not complaining anymore. And I think if we stop in the middle of transitioning to the newer system and continue with the dinosaur, which is a risk, half a dinosaur maybe, I think we're going to go back to having some problems. And this, if we're more accurate on this billing system and can guarantee that to the future with being more modern, then hopefully we're going to improve our collections, and it's just going to result in better or more funds coming into the utility division. So, you know, I think there's too much risk in throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as Councilor Cassett Sanchez said. So, you know, I'm kind of worried about this because I was a victim of it before and I understood it, and I've been asking a lot of questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Vihil Coppler. Okay, what is the pleasure of the committee? Councilwoman Lindell.
I would make a motion that we pass this for half the amount of money and review it in 6 months.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, a second. Any further discussion?
Can somebody restate the motion? Sorry.
Sure. I made a motion that we approve this for half of the amount requested with a review in 6 months.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. Can I have a roll call, please? You're on mute, Ms. Martin.
Trying to unmute here. Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal.
No, and I think there's no denying that we need to upgrade and modernize our system. And I think IT needs to be part of the migration plan, and the contract parameters need to be better defined. Thank you.
Counselor Cassette Sanchez.
Yes, and when we see it again in 6 months, I echo what Councilor Renee Villarreal said, that we need to be seeing a better integration plan.
Chair Romana Beta.
It's already 3-1, so.
All right. The
Yes.
motion fails. I mean, the motion passes.
Okay, that brings us then to item 8.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, how did you vote?
I voted yes.
Okay,
Not that it mattered.
all right, thank you.
Okay. Okay, 8B, request for the approval of amendment number 8 to service contract 180552 in the total amount of $974,346.77 plus applicable NMGRT for annual security services for city facilities, Universal Protection Services, DBA, Allied Universal Security. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Mr. Burnett. I think you're on with us. Thanks for being patient. I really just wanted to understand, I know we already approved this contract and we're currently working with Ally. I just wanted to understand better about, since our security needs have changed because of the closure of many of our facilities due to the stay-at-home order, I'm just curious about what this looks like in the next iteration for the next budget cycle, and why, or if there's a possibility for a reduced amount for this contract, I guess. And if you could help me understand that better.
Absolutely. Chairman Abeyta, Councilor Villarreal. One thing that's been really nice about working with Allied Security in recent months has been their willingness to adjust the levels of security at our various facilities based on our current needs. And so once we pass a contract with them, the way they bill us is by hours spent rather than dividing the contract up by 12 months or some other pattern like that. So for example, the libraries, Santa Fe Trails, Midtown Campus are 3 examples that come to mind pretty quickly of places where we have reduced the number of hours without adjusting the contract, and that works really well. We've been working on this amendment for several months, and I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do we create kind of a more narrow scoped contract, trying to mitigate for changes in GRT, or do we process a contract, kind of the same contract meeting the needs we have generally, and just kind of adjust month by month while we deal with the crisis? And so that's how we ended up where we're at today.
So the amount, is that the maximum cap that they could possibly spend? So there's a possibility that maybe the hours spent would be lowered in the next budget cycle and even in this cycle too, right?
Exactly. So this is the absolute cap on services. There is a spreadsheet I attached to the contract that breaks it down by facility, showing you what the schedule is, the weekly schedule, the number of hours per week, the annual hours, and basically the contract covers 100% of our security needs. That said, Allied's been very gracious in working with us and reducing hours or kind of adjusting as needed. They've been really pretty good about working with us for the last couple months.
Great to know. I just want to make sure we have that flexibility since we're not utilizing their services at full capacity, and I know they've been shifted in other ways, but just making sure about that. Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? What is the pleasure?
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second,
Okay, any further discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Signe Lindell,
yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez,
Yes.
Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay, so that concludes the items that were pulled off the consent agenda. And now we will move into item 9, which is a discussion. 9A, employee health and life insurance benefits. Ms. Salazar.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing discussion regarding the City of Santa Fe health and life insurance plans. The city offers great benefits that many are accustomed to, and we understand that changes can be challenging. Although we understand that changes will be difficult, the city has grappled with the rising healthcare costs for several years. In fact, in 2005, the city adopted a resolution creating the Group Insurance Benefits Advisory Committee for city employees. The first few statements are that the crisis in healthcare costs has forced the city to move its retirees to the state retiree health insurance plan, and future costs of healthcare for city employees continues to escalate. As a self-insured plan, there is volatility from year to year, and having a stable fund balance is critical. Since 2017, our expenses have exceeded our revenues. The city has used fund balances to offset the differences and to not increase premiums. Last year, we instituted a premium rate increase of approximately 9%. And although this increase went into effect last year, to date, the city is currently experiencing about a $2 million shortfall between expenses and revenues. Before last year, the last premium rate increase was in 2015. The national average for premium rate increases over the last 5 years is approximately 5% annually. The last plan design change was in 2015. At that time, there were issues with the massage benefit, so a medical necessity requirement was implemented. In addition to those changes, office and specialty visit copays were increased. Currently, our premium plan does not have deductibles or coinsurance. And currently, the city contributes 76.5% of the premium rates, and the employee contributes 23.5% of the premium rates. Additionally, our current fire union contract has caps on the amount of co-payments that bargaining unit employees are to pay. Each fiscal year, the Benefits Advisory Committee that I mentioned earlier passed by resolution meets to discuss the status of the plans and if there will be any changes for the upcoming fiscal year. For this year, we provided all 3 union leadership with the presentation in front of you, and then met on May 14th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. to discuss options, ideas, and recommendations on how we will move forward on our plan design changes or restructuring. The discussions yielded a lot of valuable information, and after the meeting, it was decided to request more time for discussion to change the 2 committee meetings, which this one is included, and the upcoming Public Works, Public Utility Committee meeting for discussion items, and then ask for a decision at the next council meeting. So with that, I will turn over the presentation to Ayan for more specific details about the plan and where we stand.
Okay, thank you. And we've had this presentation more than once. And so if we can focus on the options that are being presented, because I think all of the other information before that, we've already heard a couple of times over the last few months. So that would be helpful if you can focus on the different options. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don Montano with Aon. I am joined by my colleagues Todd Burley and Pamela Hadamio. Myself and Todd will primarily do the discussion with you all today. Did you want me to share the screen, or you all have the presentation in front of you?
Councilwoman Romero Worth, what do you recommend?
I think you should share the screen. I don't know if we have anybody from the public watching, but they may not have the presentation in front of them.
Okay. See, just 1 second, let me get it to come up. Hang on just 1 second. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Can you all see the screen? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
What?
I was actually going to ask for maybe some information while we were waiting, but we got the presentation up, so thanks.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, per your request, I'm going to go ahead and jump forward to the different options that we are presenting today. So on slide 14, this is the medical benefit option 1. What this option proposes is that we would replace your premium plan that you have in place today. You currently have 2 premium plan offerings, one for your non-union, your POA police union employees, and the Ask Me employees. And then you have a separate premium plan for your fire employees. Under this benefit option number 1 would replace those 2 plans with the plan design that you see in column C, the purple option. We've highlighted for you on this screen to make it easier to see what plan benefit design changes would be incorporated under this option. It would maintain your core plan and your HRA plans with the current benefit designs that they offer today. So with this new premium option, you can see on the primary care physician and specialist copays would change to $20 for primary care, $40 for specialist. Your lab and x-ray for non-preventive services would be 20%. Preventive lab work is covered at 100% as mandated by the Affordable Care Act. MRIs, PET scans, and CAT scans would be a $250 copay. Those services are currently paid 100% by the plan today. Your inpatient hospital would change to $1,000 copay. Outpatient surgery services, this would be like day surgeries, anything done in an outpatient type setting would be a $250 copay. Urgent care would increase to $40 copay. Emergency room would increase to $200 copay. Your mental health and substance abuse services for an inpatient setting, if they were admitted to an inpatient facility, that'd be $1,000 copay. And any outpatient care received in a physician's office would be a $40 copay. Your other services, such as acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, and naturopathy, those would change to a $40 copay, and it would result in a 12 visit limit. So that would be a reduction from 24 visits for those 4 services down to 12. Your therapies such as physical, speech, and occupational therapies would be a $40 copayment with a 30 visit limit. Today, that limit is 60. And then ambulance services would be a $50 copay where there is no cost sharing today. So I want to take a moment and see if there was any questions regarding this plan design structure.
Any questions? If you could raise your hand, because we don't, I can't see everybody on the screen.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman Villarreal.
I just wanted to ask, so if you reach the limits for, say, the other services, medical massage or the physical occupational therapy, after you reach that visit limit, then what happens? And say you still need to go, or you still have needs to go there.
Mr. Chair and Councilor Villarreal, if you reach your visit limitation, the benefit would no longer be covered by the plan. The member could continue to access that care at the discounted contracted rate, but they would be responsible for 100% of those costs.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. So you're gonna present 3 options, and I guess, do they all get us to the same point in terms of savings and bringing our expenses and our revenues in line? And it's just a question of how you do that in the plan design, or do these get us to different places? I'm not clear on that.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Romero-Worth, that's a great question. These 3 options would get us to a very different budget number. So I can go, if I proceed forward to the next slide, you will see on the right-hand side, the purple box, this is the budgeted numbers. If you look at the bottom, these are the overall numbers, the totals where we need to look at on rows 22 to 24. So row 22, if you look under column I, it shows the combined annual cost of 21 million. That's the total premium cost. If you slide it over to the right in column J, 16.2 million would be the City of Santa Fe's share for this option. That would be, if you drop down a couple of rows to 24, that would be a $1.178 million increase to the City of Santa Fe's cost today. In column K, that shows the impact to the employees. So overall, they're contributing under this scenario just under 5 million towards those costs, and that would be an increase of 358,000 in what they're contributing.
Mr. Chair, on that point.
Yes, Councilwoman Villarreal.
I saw those breakdowns that you provided for each option. I still don't understand what the savings would be. This gives us a number of like what the contributions will be, but what are the actual savings, as Councilwoman Romero Worth indicated?
So, Mr. Chair and Councilor Villarreal, really what we need to compare back to is the renewal. So when we look at the plans in total, here on page 7, we're looking at an overall 9.4% increase to the budget. It's 1.866. Now that is not totally the city's share. If What we're looking at for a city share of increase is today we have on the non-union Ask Me police plan, we're expecting an increase of 1.251 million. The fire plan cost will go up 194. So the city's increase would be 1.445 million.
So option one would save us a little over $300,000.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Councilwoman Romero Worth, did you have any other questions?
That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez, before we move on to second option.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. One is the AcuChiro massage napropath. Is that 12 for that for each service or those services combined?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Sanchez, it is a limit for the plan year. So your plan year runs July 1st through June 30th of each year. So it is anytime someone accesses that service, that counts as one of those visits. So once they reach 12 visits, then they've hit their limit. It's not tied to one diagnosis or one certain situation.
No, I understand that piece. It's like, can you go to, if you go to a napropath 4 times and a acupuncturist 8 times, have you used up that entire benefit? Or then could you also go to a chiro 12 times in that year?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, my apologies for misunderstanding your question. So the limit is a combination between those 4. So yes, it is correct that if you see an acupuncturist 4 times and then you go to a chiropractor 8 times, then you've hit your 12 limit maximum.
And then as Councilwoman Villarreal was mentioning, after they've hit that, they essentially pay out of pocket for the rest of those visits. If they're paying out of pocket, will that go towards their out of pocket maximum, or at that point, is it just out of pocket?
So Mr. Chair and Councilor Cassett Sanchez, it would not count any further towards their out of pocket maximum because they've exhausted the benefit limit that's under the plan design.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Those are all my questions for now.
Councilwoman Vihil Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out that the handout or the link that we have on this agenda item doesn't match the page numbers of this presentation. And as the presenter was scrolling through, there's more pages of information that are new that I hadn't seen before. For example, the sheet there on the fund balance is not included in what we have on this link. And I think, as we get down the road, I'll have some questions about the fund balance. So I'm curious about whether, and our presentation has something at the top called Add Fire Plan, and I don't see that as the presenter was scrolling through. I didn't see that on her presentation. So I just guess I should ask, are the numbers the same that on these charts, or should I put my glasses on to make sure?
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to that.
Yes, go ahead.
So we had our Benefits Advisory Committee meeting on Thursday, and it lasted till 7 p.m. So the discussion, and we also had the deadline for packet material for the Finance Committee. So the discussion items that we had resulted in some additional information to the presentation that you're seeing in front of you. So you're correct, there are more pages, but it was as a result of working with our union leadership to insert more of the information. So the numbers are the same. One of the other reasons why there's a fire, extra information on the fire plan is because the fire union expressed concerns about merging with the rest of the employees. So we wanted to make sure that there was a slide separating the 2 plans to ensure that if that was going to continue to occur, then you all are receiving the accurate numbers. But if you look at the numbers are the same.
Okay, so are you saying that in the presentation that's being reviewed right now, there's going to be a fire plan page somewhere, or you took it out of what the link is that's on Finance Committee? I mean, that's
Chair,
an example.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil Coppler, sorry. What I'm saying is the presentation that we had before the Benefits Committee meeting did not separate the fire union plan with the rest of the employees because we were engaging in conversations about combining all of them. They did not think that they would want to combine. They wanted to stay separated. So we separated the numbers, but if you use your calculator, you'll see that the totals are the same.
What totals? The total.
Don, can you go back to the slide so you can show the totals? That might help.
So, Mr. Chair and Councilor Vihil Coppler, so these totals on this benefit option number 1 that we were talking about did not change from the presentation that you have.
So just so I understand, so for example, in comparison, this includes everyone being the same, but doesn't cull out fire department.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Vihil Coppler, that is correct. So one of the goals we were trying to do was simplify the administration of the benefits plans, because today you have basically 6 plans. You have 3 plans that are offered to your non-union police and ASME employees. And then you have 3 plans that are offered to your fire department employees. And so in an effort to try and simplify the benefits, it was looked at combining everybody onto the same 3 plan offering. And so that was what we had presented at the insurance committee on Thursday of last week. Those were options we had presented to the finance committee before. And based on the feedback from Thursday's meeting, the fire expressed concerns that they would like to maintain their current plans and not make the changes. However, understanding that the city is in a budget shortfall, we still wanted to bring to your attention some of the options that could help minimize or reduce the amount of the increase we would be looking at if we do not make any plan design changes.
Okay, and then one last question. Will you be speaking about the fund balance and what uses are for that?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Vihil Coppler, yes, we can go back to those slides and speak to the fund balances.
Yeah, and I'd like to do that after we hear all the options. Right. That's important information.
Yeah, I was just asking if that would be covered. I just wasn't sure. Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Would you please just on this benefit option 1, all employees, would you clarify what the contribution of the employee is and what the contribution is of the city, i.e. the taxpayers? What are the rates that are paid?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell. So when we look at the slide title 2020-2021 Medical Renewal Benefit Option 1, all employees, yes, it has the contribution spelled out. So we are going to focus on the tables that are on the right-hand side with purple. The top section has your premium plan. And if you look at column I, rows 3 to 6, this shows you what the monthly premium rate would be based on what tier of coverage the employee selects. So for instance, if an employee needs to cover themselves and their family, their spouse and their dependent children, they would select the employee and family tier. The total cost per month for that plan would be $2,067.36. When you move over to the right, one column in J, you can see that for that family selecting that coverage, the city, which is what we have as the ER cost, the city would be covering $1,581.52 of that employee's monthly cost. And
So
if you
the
move
city,
over,
just to be clear, the city, the taxpayers pay 80% and the employees pay 20%.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lindell, it's roughly 76.5%, I believe, is the percentage that the city pays, and the employee pays the difference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and I know there's union representatives on the call. We're not going to get into comments or questions from the union until we finish the presentation, but I will give the union representatives an opportunity to speak after the committee has asked all the questions specific to the different options. So go ahead and continue with the presentation. So are we ready to move to option 2?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll move on to option 2. So with this option, it would, once again, address plan changes, moving all employees to one premium plan option. Based on the plan design, it would make this plan very similar to the core plan. So our recommendation would be to eliminate the core plan and just offer 2 plans, the premium and the HRA plan. Again, like the predecessor slides, we have highlighted the boxes in blue with red font indicating the benefits where there are changes. So with this option, it does introduce an deductible, $300 for an individual, $600 for family. The co-pays for office visits, whether it's a primary care physician or a specialist, remain the same. Your diagnostic procedures, your hospital care, all are 10% coinsurance after the deductible has been met. Emergency room will go to deductible and the 10% coinsurance. Your mental health, it would be an office visit would still remain at the $30 specialist copay. Your inpatient services would be 10% after the deductible. Once again, the acupuncture, chiro, massage therapy, and naturopathy are the same proposed changes as in the predecessor, as the preceding option, as well as the physical speech occupational therapy, and then ambulance would be 10% after deductible. So real quick, before we jump into questions, I'd like to run through an example to show how this plan would operate, because I think that would help make some sense out of this. So just say we have an individual with single coverage. It's the start of the plan year. They have not had any claims yet. Their first claim is to go in and get their annual wellness check, because that is a preventive service. They would have no out-of-pocket cost. On average, a physician office visit can cost, I used a number of average $150. So the claim total would be $150. The employee would have no out-of-pocket expense for that visit because it's considered preventive. So they have no total out-of-pocket cost. Then they fill a generic prescription. The cost of that drug is $48. The member's generic prescription copay is $10, so they would pay that when they pick up the prescription. So now their total out-of-pocket for these 2 services has been $10. Say they go for a chiropractic visit, that billed contractor rate is $90. Under this new model, the member would pay a $40 copayment. The plan would pay the difference. And now the member has paid out of pocket $50 for all of their services they've received thus far. Then this member has an urgent care visit. An urgent care visit is about $220. An urgent care has a $30 copayment under this plan. So the member pays their $30 and their total out-of-pocket expense for this year has now gone to $80. They fill their generic prescription again because it is a maintenance drug. And so they have another $10 copayment they paid. So now their out-of-pocket total goes to $90. Then this individual has an unfortunate incident and has to go to the emergency room, twist their ankle. An emergency room visit, we're estimating $1,200. Because this service is subject to deductible and coinsurance, this member has not had any service so far this year where they've had to pay their deductible. So they would pay their $300 deductible, and that would be subtracted from this $1,200 bill. The remaining balance would be $900. Then the member would pay 10% of that $900. So their total out-of-pocket for that emergency room visit is $390. That gets added to their out-of-pocket balance. So the member so far has now paid $480 towards their care thus far. Then the employee has to have an MRI of their ankle, and that MRI costs $2,400. The MRIs are subject to deductible and the coinsurance. The member has already met their deductible when they went to the emergency room, so they're only going to pay that 10% coinsurance. So they would pay $240 for the cost of that MRI. Again, that $240 gets added to what they've paid out of pocket, so that becomes a total of $720. Then it's determined this individual needs to have surgery on their ankle, and say that surgery costs $25,000. Well, an out-of-patient surgery, as you can see on the preceding slide, was 10% coinsurance after the deductible is met. Since the employee has already met their deductible, they are responsible for 10%. However, remember, there is the $2,500 individual out-of-pocket maximum. That is the most the member will pay in a plan year for their coverage. Since they have already paid $720 and all the care they have received before this, 10% of a $25,000 surgery is $2,500. They would not pay that amount. They pay the difference from the out-of-pocket maximum and the $720, which was $1,780. So now the employee has paid $2,500 out-of-pocket maximum. Any further services that they use on the plan that is a covered service would now be paid 100% by the plan for the remainder of the plan year. So does this example help understand what the changes are and how that would impact a member? So when we move on to the pricing, again, this is putting all the employees on these plans, and you can see here in column J is the city's, what would be the city's cost. So looking at a $16 million budget or a $942,000 increase. So that's compared to if we make no renewal changes, we're looking at a $1.4 million increase to the city's budget. This option would only be a $942,500 increase to the city's budget.
So this saves us how much? $450,000 more or less?
More or less, yes, Mr. Chair.
So option
Chair?
one, okay. Okay, did someone raise their hand or say something?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to, on that point, the numbers that you're saying about savings, like it really would help to see that, because every time I look at these increase and decrease, it doesn't help me understand like what we'd be saving. Is that somewhere? Is there a slide that shows that?
No, we don't really have a slide that shows that, but if you will recall here, between the six plans that you offered, the city is looking at an increase to your budget of your health, of your medical plan of $1.445 million.
Right.
If we don't make any plan design changes, your costs are going to go up by this amount. What we're saying with this option is that instead of the 1.445 million, your cost would go up 942,000.
So what you're doing, Ms. Montano, is you're taking the 900, you take the 144 and minus the 942, and that's how you get the 400 and whatever savings.
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
And when you applied the cost of option one, it's a little less of a savings, around 300,000.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to see those numbers
I agree. If you
side
could,
by side, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
we can create a slide, because I mean, we're just having a discussion tonight, but when if I don't know if it's coming back to finance or it goes to council, but I agree with Councilwoman Villarreal, it'd be good to have a slide that shows option one and option two, option three, and maybe even something else based on the discussion this evening so that we can compare it side by side. I agree.
Mr. Chair and councilors, that's very nice feedback, and we will definitely incorporate that into the presentations that we do bring back to the committees and the full council.
Okay, so option three.
Okay, Mr. Chair, thank you. Option three is pretty closely mirroring the changes that we presented on the prior slide, moving everybody to just one premium plan, eliminating the core plan, but maintaining the HRA plan. The difference is this plan incorporates higher deductibles and a higher coinsurance level. So we'd be looking at $1,000 deductible for an individual, 2,000 for family. The out-of-pocket would also increase to 4,000 and 8,000. The co-insurance would be 20% after the member has met their deductible. When we look at the impact, this option would be the one option to make these drastic of change. They're pretty drastic changes for your plans. This would keep your budget basically flat for the renewal. So when we look at these costs, if you'll see at the bottom of column J in row 23, it maintain your annual budget about 15 million. So it'd be roughly about a $64,000 increase. So these would be the options of plan designs to try at all possible to keep your costs as close to what you are currently paying for the 2019-2020 fiscal year.
So this would be a savings of over $1 million.
That is correct, compared to the renewal. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And as we go forward too, I think what would be helpful is if we can also have a comparison to other entities, government entities, like maybe the state of New Mexico and either city of Albuquerque or city of Rio Rancho, or maybe Santa Fe County. I don't know if that's possible, but I think that would be helpful too.
So, Mr. Chair, in the appendix of the presentation, we had a side-by-side comparison of the city's premium plans compared to national benchmarks and the state of New Mexico. In this presentation, which we have provided to Berna and she will be able to distribute, we were able to, over the weekend, get this County of Santa Fe benefits and get them added. It's pretty small because we've had to condense everything in here, so it's a little bit challenging to read, but once this gets distributed, you'll be able to see that the city's two plans are in the teal color, national benchmark is in purple, the County of Santa Fe is in the green boxes, and the state of New Mexico plan is in the dark blue. So this would give you an idea of what your plans look like compared to these other entities.
And is there a way to take this information and show what going to a plan comparable to the state of New Mexico would save us or comparable to Santa Fe County would save us? Or not us, but the taxpayer? Because that's really what we're talking about here, especially as we move into having to cut the budget. This is really about the taxpayer now and not really us, I guess.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Todd, I don't know if you want to weigh in on just some top of head of your mind estimates on what those costs might look like.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't have those off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that information to you quickly.
Okay, but just off the top of your head though, even option 3, is that still a richer plan than the state of New Mexico and then what Santa Fe County has, or are we comparable now with option 3?
Mr. Chair, option 3 is in the ballpark of both the county of Santa Fe and the state of New Mexico.
Is it better or is it worse? Because I don't want necessarily, I definitely won't support our employees having a plan that isn't as good as Santa Fe County or the state of New Mexico's.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the deductible on Plan 3 is higher. When I was developing that third plan, what I hoped to accomplish was to get no increase in cost to the city. So it's probably very slightly less rich than either the county or the state, mainly due to the deductible being $1,000 rather than $500 on both those plans.
So option 3, you'd have a better insurance plan if you worked for the state or the county than the city if we went with option 3.
Mr. Chair, probably
from the employee perspective.
Right. Yes, Mr. Chair, probably very slightly less rich. The city of Santa Fe's plan would be slightly less rich than either of those two plans. Again, largely driven by the deductible being twice what the deductible is on those two, on the county and state plans.
Okay. Is that the end of the presentation? Can we get into questions from the committee, or where do you want to go, Ms. Salazar?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Don.
I was gonna circle us back to the fund balance since that's what somebody had asked for. So I thought I would circle back to this slide first, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Berna, I don't know if you want to talk to the slide or you want me to go ahead and cover it.
I can talk through it. So the fund balance, the numbers provided by our finance department, as you can see on the screen, is a little over 6.2 million. The line forecasted deficit is what we've been talking about based on the fact that our expenses are coming in higher than our revenues. So that leaves
that's for current year, right? So this isn't the projected deficit in the next year. This is the deficit we're expecting June 30th of this year.
Chairman, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So after we remove that amount, we're at a little over 4.2 million. And then we have in the next line an incurred but not reported reserve that the city has consistently put in a reserve over the course of the last several years to the tune of 1.6 million. So once we take that out, that would leave us at a little bit over 2.5 million in our fund balance. And again, this does not include the increase to the city's budget if we didn't make any changes, because that's going to increase the premiums. And as Don discussed earlier, 76.5% is the city's share of the premiums.
Mr. Chair, and
yes,
Director Salazar, can you repeat that last sentence you just said? It does not include what again?
The slide, Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, the slide that Don Montano discussed earlier about the premium rate increase. So if we made no changes, the city would be experiencing about a 1.4 million increase to the budget, and that's not included in this slide here. So that would be the city's share of contributions if we made no changes.
So we'd have 1.1 left in the fund reserve if we did nothing. 1.1 million.
Mr. Chair, that would be correct if you use the fund to offset the city's portion of the increase, correct?
Okay. And again, the history of this fund balance, what, am I right? And we always knew, or previous governing bodies and administrations knew that being self-insured, we were going to always have increases. And so they set aside money to try to accommodate that. Is that the history behind this?
Mr. Chair, approximately 4 or 5 years ago, we were going through a similar situation in that the fund balance was being depleted. And at that point, City Council thought it would be prudent to keep a minimum fund balance of $5 million.
Okay.
Well, what that was comprised of was that 1.7 million in IBNR. And what that is that at the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, that's the approximate amount of claims that were incurred in the fiscal year but haven't been paid yet. So there's roughly $1.7 million in existing claims at the end of the year. And then the other 3.5-ish million was to really cover the city during times like this when the fluctuation in claims exceeded the revenue received. Otherwise, what we were trying to avoid was in good years holding the premiums flat or decreasing them, and in bad years increasing, having double-digit increases. So rather than chase claims around every year, we wanted to have this reserve in place so that we could smooth out the increases over the years.
Okay. Mr. Chair.
Yes, let's go ahead and open it up to questions from the committee and the other counselors on the.
I just had a question on this one point on the medical fund balance. So was that a one-time reserve, or have we been adding to it over time? How does it get replenished, if at all?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, the way it gets replenished is in those years when revenues exceed costs. That amount is stored in this reserve fund to offset those years like we've had this year where expenses exceed revenues. And again, what that really does is smooth out the increases over time so that we don't have a 2% reduction one year followed by a 16% increase the next. And we can draw from this fund, but we also, any excesses are placed into this fund in the years when claims are running lower.
And Mr. Chair, just one more question. Is the forecasted deficit and the IBNR, are those numbers kind of in line with what we've seen before, or are those dramatic?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Romero Worth, the fund balance in the 7 or 8 years I've been associated with the city has been as high as between $9 and $10 million and as low as, I believe it was below $5 million 4 or 5 years ago when the council decided it would be prudent to set a minimum level and try to achieve that. So again, the claim fluctuates quite a bit. As you see, that this year there's a $2 million deficit. 3 or 4 years ago, there was a $2 million surplus. So again, we just wanted to set a lower boundary on the amount in the fund so that it wouldn't be depleted to the point where it would not even cover the IBNR.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, questions from the committee or the other counselors on the call, if you can use your blue hand, because I still can't see everybody. Let's see, Counselor Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess my question is, these scenarios help us to understand options. And what I'm wondering is, are these scenarios based on the trends of what types of claims we see most often? Meaning, are we trying to provide the best type of insurance coverage based on what we're seeing in our employees and what they're utilizing our benefits for, or insurance benefits.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that there were really three results that I wanted to show. That option number one is not implementing a deductible and co-insurance and just increasing co-pays to a level that wouldn't be an extreme hardship on the employees. Plan two was implementing a reasonable and in all honesty, one of the richer deductibles, and certainly richer than the county of Santa Fe and the state of New Mexico. And when you implement a deductible and co-insurance, that spreads it across those categories, the inpatient, outpatient, hospital, lab, x-ray, and doesn't unduly hurt specific employees who use specific coverages. The last example was just implementing a much higher deductible and co-insurance to show what it would take for the city to not have any increase to either the city share or the employees. Really, from our observations, the only benefit that doesn't align with benchmarks is the medical massage, naturopathy, chiropractic. The city, the last few years, has spent approximately $1.3 million on those services, which equates to between 6 and 7% of claims. We don't have good benchmarks on it because other entities cover it at such a low level that the city's claims are 10 times what we would see with any other entity.
I guess I'm wondering if there's like more data to back you up on these scenarios. Not so much about the benefits like medical massage, but what are the major medical procedures that are happening or health related trends that we're seeing for the staff that end up utilizing certain aspects of our current insurance plan? And if you looked at that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes. And again, what the deductible and co-insurance does is spread that against amongst all of the categories. The other increase the co-pays of services that are used more frequently. But again, the benefit that really stands out as being extremely out of line with benchmarks is the medical massage one, which is why we implemented higher co-pays and lower limits on that specific benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Vihel Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to go back to option 3, and I'm wondering if, I guess maybe I don't understand the chart, but option 3 seems, obviously saves the city the most money. Am I right to say that because of that, most of the increased cost is borne by the employee share? In either deductible or co-pays or what? Tell me what I'm looking at.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilor Vihel Coppler, that's absolutely correct. What we're doing are shifting. So under that scenario, there would be no increase to the contribution from the employee's paycheck. But at the time of service, it would shift that $1.4 million worth of costs onto the employees in terms of deductibles and co-insurance at the time of service. But there would not be a change to the paycheck contributions.
Okay, and then the next question I have is I'm not sure I heard it, but what is the philosophy? What is your take on using the remainder of, the bottom line on the fund balance toward any of these options?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Vihel Coppler, again, we wanted to, 4 or 5 years ago, we wanted to implement a minimum fund balance to cover any extended shortfalls as we've seen the last couple of years. What would happen is that if we fully depleted that balance, the city would have to essentially cover that shortfall from a balance in another fund. So that's why we thought it prudent to keep a minimum amount in there, so there would never be a shortfall where that would be the result.
Okay, and then the last thing I want to ask is these extra charts that we don't have, is it possible for Ms. Salazar for you to email those tomorrow?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Vihil Coppler, yes, as Don Montano mentioned, I can get them to you by this evening.
Or actually just email this whole presentation, because it's different.
Yes, that's the plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councilwoman Cassett Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a question on that fund balance again. I know you mentioned that it's there to help us essentially ride the waves of premiums and try to keep that a little bit more stable. Does the fund balance also contribute to claims that the city has to pay out? Or is that budgeted elsewhere?
No, Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, yes, absolutely. What the city pays claims to Cigna every week. So again, that and really we kind of true it up at year end and show a year end fund balance, but that balance really fluctuates throughout the year based on claims payments throughout the year, and that's the $2 million forecasted deficit. There is kind of our year end estimate for this fiscal year, but actually the balance is going to fluctuate throughout the year as claims are paid on a weekly basis.
Okay, so that's one of the reasons that we need to make sure that we protect that fund balance, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, yes, that's absolutely correct. And again, it's really to smooth, as you said, just ride the waves from year to year. Again, there have been years with $2 million surpluses where we did not change premiums for either the employees or the city. And again, it's kind of a rainy day fund for years as we've had the last couple.
Okay, thank you. I echo Councilwoman Villarreal's desire to see some more of the trends in claims and what those are looking like, and where the needs really are. The other piece that I'd be interested in, I don't know if you have this data, but mentioning that our essentially soft tissue, chiro, acu claims, massage claims are disproportionate from what we usually see. I know part of the philosophy there is that some of this preventative work helps prevent other types of medical needs. Have we seen any evidence that has been successful with our plan in terms of comparing it to what we would see in other places?
Councilor Cassett Sanchez, that's difficult because you're trying to measure claims that don't happen. But what we're trying to do by changing increasing the copay and reducing the limit is make sure that the benefit is being appropriately used and not abused.
Right. Yeah, I understand that, and I know that has been an issue. And then I also I think it's kind of trying to strike that balance between also making sure we are not preventing services, but I'm also looking at the PT and the occupational therapy. Right. I know it's a little bit challenging because it's claims that haven't happened with our population, but I'd be curious to see what potentially happened at the county or at the state where you could argue that it's a similar population, and if they are seeing more claims that we would hope to be prevented. I know that it's a challenging data piece to get your hands on. So I was just curious if there was any way of taking a look at that in terms of if it does save us money from claims that potentially could be put against the city. Does that make sense? I'm getting.
No, Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassett says it absolutely does. It's just difficult to get benchmarks on those specific services. I mean, it's not as if other entities share their claim data with us if we aren't the consultant for them. And again, the city of Santa Fe exceeds national benchmarks by such a level that they're really not comparable, but I will certainly see what I can do.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, you know, we have these 3 plans. These are not necessarily the only plans we have to choose from. In essence, we continue to have discussions about this and we can start to piece together other plans if we feel, because as Councilor Abeta mentioned, option 3 becomes a less rich plan than the county or the state. And that's absolutely not something that we want to be offering to our employees, but there are things that we can look at between what we have now as option 2 and option 3, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, yes, that's absolutely correct. Again, option 3 was simply my attempt to show what benefit changes the city would have to make to get to no increase to either the city nor the employees.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Sounds like we have a lot of thinking and tinkering to do before we come to a final plan. So I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for either Ms. Salazar or Ms. McCoy. I recall that didn't we implement a rate increase last year?
Yes, we did. It was a little over 9% last year.
And we still ran into a deficit even with the rate increase?
Chairman, yes, we are running in the deficit right now. As Todd mentioned earlier, you can have good years and you could have bad years. You might have a few really high claims over the course of the year, and we've had a few of those. So we've had a couple of challenging years, and so even with the little over 9% premium rate increase, we're still, as of right now, about a $2 million deficit.
Okay.
So Mr. Chair, what you'll see, we increased revenue 9%, but if you look at row 19 on the slide that's up now, you can see claims have increased almost 15%.
Okay, so we raised the rates high enough.
Largely driven by a handful of high-cost claimants.
Okay. Now the options combine the plans, fire and everybody in the same plan. Are there other cities in New Mexico where fire has their own separate plan, or are we the only ones? Or how do we compare to other cities as far as is it typical for fire departments to have their own plan?
Mr. Chair, councilors, we do not see other municipalities, public entity clients who have separate plan designs for certain populations of employees. They typically offer the same plans to all employees, while they may offer more than one plan design for employees to select from, but they don't have specific plans carved out for certain populations of employees. That's not very common.
Okay, I'm gonna give, I don't know if any of our union presidents or representatives that deal with the insurance benefits, if they're on, I'm gonna give them the opportunity to address the finance committee before we wrap this up. So I see a hand up by Matthew Martinez, and then after Matthew, Marcos Esquivel. So go ahead, Mr. Martinez. Mr. Martinez, are you on? Joe, are you on the line? I can't hear Mr. Martinez. What about Mr. Esquivel? Let's see if we could hear from him.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
they don't have any ability to be heard. I think they need to be promoted to panelist.
Okay, let me see here. Let me go and see if I can do that. Let's see.
Counselor, you're a host. You should be able.
Joe, are you on?
Yes, sir.
Can you promote them to panelists so that they can speak?
Yes, sir. Give me a sec here. Let me make myself host.
Okay, Mr. Martinez, I think you can address us now.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think my mic is unmuted. Is that correct?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for allowing me this time to address the council. This is something that's very important to the employees. We spent some time talking with POA and ASME over the last few days about the specific direction of these proposals and where they're going. First of all, I want to state that all three of the unions agree after Thursday's meeting that we feel that staying with this plan that we have currently and seeing an increase to our premiums is something that we're all willing to see. We are also willing to look at making some changes to any plan benefits or group models with the city's participation, looking like sometime in the fall after open enrollment in June. We feel like it's a kind of a last minute attempt to make any kind of repairs. That being said, I do have quite a few questions from the presentation. I know I spoke with Don and Todd and Ms. Sanchez quite a bit on Thursday, but there are some more questions that I have. Would we be able to look at some of those and address some of those questions now off of that presentation?
I'm fine with that. If it starts getting a little late, we may have to limit it because I do want to give Mr. Esquivel a chance to address us too, but go ahead and start asking questions.
You got it, sir. I will go ahead and give a small preview of the information. So can we go back to the first page real quick, if you don't mind, Don? I'm sorry, I apologize. Page 3. So I got a couple questions about this page specifically. One of the things that we keep highlighting in this, and there is a complete slide, is that there is a negative fund balance of about $2 million, which we are forecasting for the end of the fiscal year, which expires in June. One of my concerns is that deficit, we do have enough money in the fund to cover that deficit. So there's not necessarily a need for the city to put any money into the fund because the fund is solvent. And it's solvent because of surplus and surpluses from the past and monies that have been inputted by both employee and employer over the creation of the fund. Another thing that concerns me about this slide is it takes a comparison of an 11-month snapshot of the previous years, but then it only does a 8-month preview of this month, which then will show a higher percentages when Todd highlighted that there's a 14% increase in PPMs. So I think it'd be fairer if we did all this in June around time of open, after open enrollment. So we have a full list of data to work off of. I'm looking at this on a cell phone, so it's a little hard to read.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to voice a concern to Bernadette if this constitutes negotiation, because if it does, it's inappropriate to have that kind of a discussion at this meeting.
Well, we're not. He's just asking a question, and I think if we just answer his question, then that's fine, and he can suggest things, but we're not engaging back with him.
Okay, as long as you don't engage back.
Yeah, thank you.
And correct. These are suggestions. These are what we would hope to see as we continue on working with HR on this project.
I agree, and I think it is helpful that, yeah, the more you tell us now, the more we can address as we move forward. So continue. Thank you.
Sounds good. Can we go to the next page, Don? So page number 4, this shows the deficit, the operating deficit that the city has seen for this fiscal year. This is revenue that is coming in by employee and employer contributions, and the expenses going out for the claims that shows a negative projected balance of almost $2 million at the end of the year. I feel like every time we talk about the benefit options, there's discussion about this negative operating balance being affected by it, but it shouldn't, because the plan fund, the insurance fund balance should be able to cover it, because it's 6 point some million dollars. So there shouldn't necessarily be a deficit until the city receives that money at the end of the fiscal year when everything gets settled up. Can we move to the next page, Don? Can we go to, can we move to the first option? There's a financial breakdown of option 1. So looking at option 1, this is an option that's probably the closest to what we have right now. If you look at some of the items J and K, there is an increase both to employer contributions. The employee will go up from a $450 a month cost to $485. So there's an increase in cost. And with that increase in cost to our premiums, the city also sees an increase in cost in regards to their contribution based on the CBAs for all entities. Is that correct, Don? And Todd?
Mr. Chair, Councilors, Matthew. So yes, what this slide is illustrating is there is an increase to both the employer and the employee, but the percentage sharing is remaining the same. So the city is still picking up the 76.5%, which is what is in the union agreements.
That's right. My question is to the last portion of that box. It says amount increased and decreased. So the city is going to see an increase to their contributions, as well as the employee is going to see an increase of the contributions. That if there is any excess on the following years, that is just going to go to the fund as well, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councilors, and Matthew. So what we're projecting on this slide is in total that the costs for the plan year would run about 21.2 million. So that includes the cost of what is being paid to Cigna to administer your plan, pay claims, the cost to purchase the stop loss insurance to protect the plan against large claims, and then also the funds that would be used to pay the claims. If the claims come in higher than what we expect, then no, there would not be any surplus available that would contribute to the fund. If the claims came in lower than what we would expect, then there is the potential for a surplus that would be contributed to the fund. The way these options are priced is there is not a margin included to where we would try to have a surplus to contribute to that fund. These are priced to break even, and that's why it's a 50-50 chance of whether it's been priced right and we're going to be right on the nose, or it's going to be underfunded, which is what has happened this year.
Right. So so my question is, so these changes are to equalize the revenue in and then the claims out without using the insurance fund to pay any deficits for highs and lows throughout the years.
Yeah, Matt, that's correct. For the next fiscal year, if everything goes as expected, there would neither be a deficit nor a surplus to the fund.
Okay, but right now there still is enough money in the fund to pay off this expected deficit because it's at 6.3 million. And then if we did make changes that increase the premium and the employer contribution, hopefully we wouldn't have to worry about that 2 million projected deficit because it'd be covered by the fund balance. And in essence, the revenue increase would then possibly be placed into a surplus.
That's correct. But again, the reason City Council decided 4 or 5 years ago to keep a minimum in that fund balance is, let's say that things don't go as planned and there's another $2 million deficit next year. Then at some point, not only are we going to have to fund our expected costs, but we're going to have to fund an additional amount to rebuild that surplus in the fund.
Okay, so I agree that the money there is just to make sure that we're at that $5 million. But I just wanted to make sure that the deficit wasn't coming from any kind of city entity. It was more or less coming from the insurance fund or from the employee contributions for that. Can we scroll past the options, Don? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back up to page 17? I apologize. So I have a lot of questions for this one. This was a new slide that we haven't seen. You said this was based on a single individual and the cost that he would see based on this specific description of work needed.
So, Mr. Chair, Councilors, Matthew, what we did is we added an example to show how this plan would operate, because oftentimes understanding how a deductible comes into play and how co-insurance works gets quite confusing. So we created a visual, and this is just an example to show that if we put this plan in place, and if an employee, it could be an employee, this could be a member, it's just an individual, if they receive this type of care, this would be an example of what their out-of-pocket cost would be for these types of services. So it's purely an example. The claim total amounts are just averages based on claims of what we see in data. So it's not saying that, you know, every emergency room is a $1,200 visit. It's based on the care that's given, the tests that are given, but this was just to draw an example to show how an individual will be impacted by moving to this plan, when they could possibly pay their deductible, and what it would look like if they met their out-of-pocket maximum.
Okay, so my question, I guess, is that this is a example of a single individual. So looking at the executive summary from 2015, there was 1,233 employees on the plan. Right now, we're looking at 1,180. But of that plan in 2015, we had 3,144 people utilizing that plan. So most of those plans are family plans. Do you know how many plans are family plans? And since there is a change in deductibles, how would that affect us as a group, since majority of the plans, I think, may be family plans?
Yeah, Matt.
And in regard to your example, I guess, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that example, and again, keep in mind, most members are not going to hit the out-of-pocket maximum. It's just an example that I put together to show you what happens when a member does. The majority of the members don't hit the out-of-pocket maximum, and quite a few don't hit the deductible level. Keep in mind, all the preventive stuff is paid 100%. So the $300 deductible only applies to non-preventive services.
Okay. Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome.
Can we scroll? I didn't write down which page number. Can we scroll down a couple pages if you don't mind, Don?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? My sound keeps going off and on, and so I lost you there for a minute and could not hear where you asked to move to.
I was asking if you could just scroll down the presentation. I think we're close to the end.
This would be the last slide.
Okay, that's perfect. I don't think I have any more questions about the proposal. I'm hoping we'll be able to get a copy of that proposal, but I also have some other questions. There were some questions kind of about our percentages that are picked up by the city and employee benefits. A lot of those percentages were originally discussions that have taken place over 20 years and through negotiations to make any kind of changes. As we move forward, I would hope that we can look at it all the information openly and not take a look at the CBA and what that CBA information has, if possible. There's also some questions about the musculoskeletal claims and diagnosis claims that I think VRAL had. Councilwoman Villarreal, I had some information from the 2011 executive summary that was provided to us by United Health. We're hoping to get one of these summaries from Cigna to help us make an educated decision. In 2015, the most diagnosed claim was intervertebrate disc disorder and other connective tissue disorders, which accounted for 11% of the planned payments. Diagnosis, cost and utilization by diagnosis group was musculoskeletal, was the number one. It was 423 claims annually. Musculoskeletal system has a pretty broad glossary: back disorders, arthropathies, dorsopathies, rheumatoid arthritis, osteopathies, and acquired deformities. One of the things that Tom said when we were talking about PT and massages is that a lot of that information is unclear because of the way Cigna reports it. We did talk about it on the 14th. Back in 2015, the massage or musculoskeletal group was about $1 million versus $1.3 million this year. So there is an increase of 30% for that category. One of the things said that he wasn't really, I don't think they were able to pull a lot of information from that musculoskeletal system group, which was actually going to be massages and which was going to be some other type of intervention. I think a lot of that would fall back on Cigna, and I think if there is abuse of those, sorry about that, use of those services, I think we should talk to Cigna about looking at ways that they could decrease that abuse. That's all I have. I appreciate Mr. Chair and the council for allowing me this time to talk. Like I said previously, all three unions are on board with making some type of change. We don't feel that we had the opportunity or the information to participate in these conversations. Some of this information came out and was presented to City Council back on February 12th with an agenda of action items that are coming to fruition now prior to any change in the DRT. That being said, we look forward to working with HR. We do agree that there is some places that we can make changes to keep the plan solid, and we look forward into meeting with HR and moving forward in the next week or months.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Okay, Mr. Esquivel, are you still available?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Counselor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak. First thing I just wanted to say, I just want us to all remember that the 1,400 plus employees of the city of Santa Fe are also taxpayers. My first question would be to Todd. Todd, you were talking about the motion or the movement the council had made a few years ago to have a certain amount of reserves put in the medical fund. That motion that was made, was that a requirement or is that a recommendation?
Mr. Chair, I don't recall if that was a formal resolution or just a recommendation.
Okay, would it be possible when we get more information to have that answered, please? Hello?
I assume it's in the records of the city council meetings from in that time period.
Okay, thank you. My next question, if we can go to the benefit option 1. Okay, and then if we can go to the side by side, there we go. Okay, so if we look at row, I guess that would be K, and we go down, or column K, and we go down to row 23. We see where the city of Santa Fe's cost is 7.8% increase, and the employee cost is a 7.7% increase. Now, I just want everybody to please keep in mind that this 7.7% could be a little bit deceptive. I know not intentionally, but it's showing what the increase of the premium is. What it doesn't show is the increased cost to the employee. If you take an example, okay? We had a gentleman here with us today that he took his this year's medical expenses, his actual expenses, and he compared them to option 1's the new options in 1, and he actually showed a 36% increase in his cost. So what costed him set amount of dollars today, should that same plan have been our current plan, it would have been a 36% increase to his expense. And another thing we don't see here is the costs, if there's any changes, excuse me, to prescriptions. So that leads me, I guess, to my next question is, Don, you had shown us a slide where you gave us an example in option 2. If you can please, okay, thank you. My question is, could we get this same example applied to all 3 options, including the option that I believe Matt might have mentioned, where we just allow the fund balance to absorb the impact? And I just want to say, you know, Chairman Abeyta had mentioned that from the employees' standpoint, he wanted to see how our plans compare to other entities. And my question is, could we compare the options to our current plan? Okay. And then lastly, I would just like to state one other thing. Todd had mentioned that in option 1, you guys came up with this option with the intent of causing no extreme hardship to the employees. So when we're giving an example, if we could, I would like to see how an example of option 1 with an employee who ends up in the emergency room, how that option would impact that employee who was one of our lower paid employees, $14 to $16 an hour, who just got a decrease in their pay due to furloughs by 40%. So if we don't want to cause harm to the employees, I can't see how $1,000 copay to an inpatient stay would not tragically affect an employee who was just furloughed 40% of their salary or their pay. That's all I have. Thank you guys for your time.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up then. I appreciate both Mr. Esquivel and Mr. Martinez for joining us this evening. And if the staff can please, as we prepare, I believe, Ms. Salazar, we have to go to the, we're going to the council with this next week, right? Because we have to make changes because our year is ending here pretty quick. Is that the time frame or timeline?
Chairman, yes, that's correct. So comparable to every other year that the benefits committee meets, they meet to determine any changes that will be made for the fiscal year. So this year is on the same timeline, but we are discussing plan design changes. So it'll come before the Public Works, Public Utilities Committee next week on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, it'll come before council.
Okay, so yeah, that would be helpful if you can try to address between now and then as many questions and concerns that both Mr. Martinez and Mr. Esquivel asked. And if you could also get us a comparison of the state of New Mexico's plan and how these options compare to that. That would be helpful. And in closing, I would just like to thank the other members of the Finance Committee and the counselors that joined us for this discussion. This is something that, given the situation that we're in, if I had to choose between keeping employees employed in their jobs and having a less rich benefit plan, I'm certainly going to vote that way as an individual counselor, because I think it's more important that we try to save as many jobs as we can, as opposed to having as rich a health plan as we have. But with that, I'll go ahead and once again thank everybody, and we'll move on to the next item. I look forward to having this discussion again at Public Works and then with the council next week. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Clarification, we're looking at next week voting on this. However, there's like some outstanding data pieces that we would like to see, as well as clarification of the scenarios kind of built out the way that example was for option 1. And I think all of that being said, what is I know we have a time frame here before the end of the current fiscal year, but do we have more time? Because I don't think it's actually realistic to say next week we're going to get this all figured out. We've tried this before. Remember this? I'm just trying to be realistic and wanted to ask Director Salazar about timeframes. If we have a little bit more flexibility because I think next week is going to be kind of challenging to get all the information.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, so we are a little compressed because we have to allow enough time for open enrollment for our employees to come onto our plans if they select or make any changes during this time. In addition, we have to also provide Cigna with enough time to develop our summary plan descriptions that happen annually. So I can work with them to see if there's any possibility to push it out a little bit longer, but I think we're going to be pretty stressed for time here.
I guess I was just thinking that that's a lot of information to pull before next week and have it in the packet material, as well as getting these comparisons. They take time. And I guess I'll speak for myself. I'd be willing to do a special meeting if we had to, just because I don't like these timeframes where everyone's compressed to get these clarity points together in such a short amount of time, given also what you have to put in packet material.
So one thing, Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we did the Cigna report that shows the different claims that we've received. It was presented to council back in February. So we can start with that and I can see if we can get updated information, but it was from February. So I'll go ahead and resend that out and that may be helpful.
That would be helpful. And then the comparison pieces of breakdowns using the same formula for option 1 as for option 2 and 3. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Yeah, I just want to clarify as well regarding the timeline, because it still sounded like we were kind of having some conversations and looking at a few different options. I also, I'm curious if we have looked at, I believe that the state does a health insurance plan based on salary. Has that been explored? Is that something that we talk about exploring? You know, again, I know that we're now on a pretty short timeline apparently, but that is something else I would really like to look at if possible.
So I think what you're saying, Councilor Cassette Sanchez, and this is something that I think Mr. Esquivel kind of pointed out. As far as the employee is concerned, you're saying that the state has a plan that the less you make, the less you have to pay. Is that what you're?
I believe so. That's my question. If my understanding of that is accurate, I see Pam Jaramillo is nodding.
So if you can include that in the information you bring forward, if you can show us the state's plan and how not only the general overview, but how it impacts employees who make less money if they indeed get to pay less into the plan.
Mr. Chair, it's a bracketed salary. The higher paid employees pay 40% of the premium, the lower paid pay 20%. And I think higher paid for the state is $60,000. So anyone making more than that would pay 40%. But keep in mind, we're also somewhat limited by that 76.5% in the contract.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Romero Worth, did you want to add anything before we move on?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, then let's go ahead and move on to the last item on our agenda so we can close this meeting out, which is matters from staff. Ms. McCoy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Mr. Chairman, councilors, today you received a memo from myself indicating what our FY21 shortfall revenue decline will be. To summarize, I think many of you have had a chance to read that, but to summarize, the revenue decline from the FY20 baseline level will be 100 million. That is an estimate at this time, and we plan to bring forward, as we have been through the Finance Committee and through the other committees, a plan of several different options on how to submit a balanced budget to you at the end of July. So this is unprecedented times, as we have all been saying, not only with the public health emergency that we are facing, but also with the revenue declines that we are expecting as a result of the economic downturn from the pandemic. So we look forward to continuing these, what have turned out to be study sessions with you as we go forward. We are taking any requests for information that you would like to have presented as a study session in front of the Finance Committee. After speaking with a few of you, we have a good understanding of some upcoming presentations about the makeup of the Santa Fe economy as well. So we'd be interested in knowing what is at the top of your mind and how we can bring additional information, as we did with our debt service requirements earlier in the meeting.
Okay, and as I understand it also, and the memo that was passed out earlier alluded to this, but it sounds like depending on the department and the service that they provide, that committee will kind of get the first shot or the first look at what those specific departments are considering doing to try to balance the budget. And then, am I correct? So like finance, we'd probably look at the internal service departments like IT, finance, HR, etc. And where like community services, that department, those types of uses, the quality of life committee would take a look at some of those proposals. And then obviously public works and utilities would look at that.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct. And the goal of this process, although it is different than the prior years, is to be able to bring options, as Director Salazar has done today with the health insurance benefit options, for debate and for deliberation ahead of the administration submitting the recommended FY21 budget in July.
Okay, great. All right. So I would, if we do this right, and I don't know if there is a right, a lot of the debate and a lot of the discussion and a lot of the what's going to go into this could be done at the committee levels, the different committees, and then maybe by the time we have our actual budget hearings with the Finance Committee, a lot of these ideas and options would have been vetted through the relevant committee, and maybe our budget hearings will be, could be a little easier than in years past, because a lot of the work will be done at these committees, hopefully.
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Just a quick question on that. Does that memo explain how we got to the 150 or 100 million deficit number? Like what factored in, considering we're still limited with the data we receive from the state?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, there are really three variables that we are taking into consideration. It's what sectors of the economy are reopening and at what time and at what capacity. Given that the cause of the economic downturn is the global pandemic that we're facing. Those were three of the primary variables that we had at our disposal to be able to project going forward, given that, as is stated in the memo, the historical data that we have is not going to give us any type of insight into how long or the duration of this economic downturn. It does give us an insight into all of the different sectors of our economy and how, as we monitor what businesses start to close and do not reopen, it'll give us an understanding, or how quickly tourism comes back. It'll give us an understanding of how quickly those revenues will rebound.
And you said, I think when we chatted briefly, that this was also based on some data points that the state gave us, correct?
Correct, Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal. The state is looking at, I believe, 25% to 35% revenue decline in FY21. And so we've been working in collaboration to better understand the how the downturn will impact the economy here in Santa Fe, as opposed to in other municipalities that have very different economic makeup than we do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, on that point.
Yes, go ahead.
So Mary, thank you. Thank you for your memo, and thank you for the analysis you presented on how you've gotten to where you think our revenue levels will be. I'm just curious, so it's based on, you know, looking at what will reopen and when, but we don't know, just because things open, we don't know what the public will do in terms of utilizing what's open. So I just want to point out and have you confirm for me that, again, we have no historical data on this, and we don't know for sure. These are our best guesstimates.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, yes, that is correct. For example, I was speaking with Director Randall earlier today about the capacity which our hotels are at. They're at 25% capacity. Some hotels are hitting that cap already, and others are not. And as you indicated, you know, whether or not someone decides to travel to Santa Fe, they feel safe enough to travel, will really indicate how quickly our tourism, the tourism sectors of our economy rebound. But we're still limited with that 25% cap at hotels under the current reopening phase. So for the current duration, that's dictating how much revenue we estimate coming into, for example, the lodgers tax fund, or even being generated by GRT. And even at that, as you indicated, you know, we don't expect to hit that full 25% if folks don't feel comfortable or safe given the continued outbreak.
Or as your memo suggests, if we slide into another spike, and you know, we have to force closures, or people really feel like it's just not safe to travel or, you know, go to restaurants or whatever it is. So just want to point that out, that again, I really appreciate you guys are trying to give us some sort of framework from which to work, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and you know, these are our best guesstimates. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, that is, I appreciate you saying that. We are committed to bringing quarterly budget adjustments as we do get real-time data, as we do get those monthly distributions from the Taxation and Revenue Department. If things start to skew rosier than the $100 million picture, you know, we will have opportunities to adjust that going forward. Or if they skew towards our worst case scenario, which is more to the tune of $150 million in revenue loss, or 46% decline, then we will have to be making further cutbacks.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, any matters from the committee? All right, well, thank you, Mary, I appreciate it. If you can, at one of our upcoming hearings, if we can start taking a look at fund balances. The utilities, I know they have some fund balances, so if we can get an overview of that, that'd be appreciated.
Of course.
Okay, all right, then we are adjourned. Thank you. Have a good night.